What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto x Anthro Harem? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Deep within the dense forests of one of Konoha's more secluded training grounds, a multicolored blur darted through the trees, ricocheting between their trunks at incredible speeds as flashes of razor-sharp blades darted through the air in various directions. Even as the blur double-backed and looped around through the woodlands as if following an unseen track, each thrown blade hit its mark dead center regardless of where the targets had been placed. After hitting every single target that had been set up in the large clutch of trees, the blur finally shot out of the foliage, skidding for several feet before finally coming to a complete stop in a three-point crouch. Standing back up to their full height of 5 feet 7 inches, the figure lightly dusted himself off, bearing a slender and lithe athletic build balanced between strength and speed. However, they didn't exactly look normal. Looking more like an anthropomorphic fox, the person's piercing icy blue eyes glanced off to the side, their predatory slit pupils adjusting to the unfiltered light of the sun's glare. Obviously male, the teen bore digitigrade legs that ended in clawed paw-like hands, two long backswept fox-like ears atop his head that twitched at the slightest noise, and a long foxtail extending from the base of his spine. His body was covered in a dense coat of short red-orange fur that turned into black on his fingers starting at the knuckle, his eyes ringed with black that ran back towards his temples and up into his fox ears. His face had a slight stubby muzzle-like shape to it, but it wasn't much. He was clad in a pair of gray 3/4-length pants held up by a plain black leather belt that bore the engraved metal plate of a Konoha Hite 8 as a belt buckle, a sleeveless mesh top over his furry torso, skin-tight black fingerless elbow-length gloves on his hands and forearms with blood-red metal bracers strapped to his arms over them that had 3 short claw-like protrusions of crimson metal sticking out just above his knuckles, black cloth bindings wrapped around his forelegs from his paws to his knees, blood-red metal greaves of similar design as his bracers strapped to his shins that covered the tops of his paw-like feet, and a blood-red scarf wrapped around his neck that was pulled up over his nose like a face mask while the rest of it trailed halfway down his back behind him. An X-shaped harness made of several black leather straps crisscrossed his torso over his top that bore a dozen black kunai holsters scattered all around it that were all within easy reach of his nimble hands, 3 more strapped to the side of either thigh, and a larger than average dark gray equipment pouch centered along his lower back just above his tail. Set at his hips were a pair of black leather holsters that cradled his twin silver trench knives, both having been custom-made for a more comfortable grip with jagged knuckle guards. Impressive, Hitaki Kakashi praised casually with an eye smile aimed at his student, a stopwatch held in his hand as he leaned against a nearby tree that stood alone in the clearing. You finished 13.4 seconds faster than your previous record. You've gotten much faster than you were last week. HMPH. Of course I have. I've been training harder than I was back then. The fox-like genin grumbled with a huff, hooking his thumbs in his pockets as he easily balanced on the padded balls of his paw-like feet, his toes subconsciously flexing slightly and causing his claws to lightly scrape at the ground. Besides, my speed is my greatest weapon. It stands to reason that I would try to get better. Now, Naruto. No need to get so defensive. Kakashi sighed out with a disarming wave of his hand, pocketing the stopwatch. No one's judging. HMPH. Naruto snorted quietly again as he looked away and glared off to the side, something that made Kakashi frown slightly beneath his mask. He still couldn't believe what had happened to the poor boy. As a young child, he had been kidnapped and experimented on by Konoha's greatest traitor to date, Orochimaru. No one could really figure out what the man's reasoning was behind singling out Naruto that night, but then again, no one could predict what that madman was going to do next or even imagine what he was thinking about. In the end, Uzumaki Naruto had been changed in more ways than just his body and DNA. He had gone from a bright-eyed and hyperactive kid to the steely-eyed and focused 16-year-old he was now. It had been by sheer chance that the base he'd been at had been found and raided by the Anbu. He was brought to Konoha and it was discovered that he was, in fact, the same child that had gone missing less than 2 years prior to his rescue. Regardless, there were definitely some lasting physical and psychological scars from the entire ordeal. I'm gonna go get my knives. Naruto mumbled before suddenly sprinting back into the forest in the form of a gray, orange, and red blur, leaving the Junin behind. Sighing heavily again, Kakashi closed his lone eye and ran a hand through his gravity-defying silver hair. Sometimes, I just can't help feeling like I'm failing as a sensei when it comes to that boy. The Junin mumbled out to no one in particular as his hand slid down to rub the back of his neck. Don't worry, he'll come around eventually. Haruno Sakura commented from her spot on a branch above him, lounging across it on her back while staring up through the thin canopy of leaves the tree provided, keeping the sun out of her eyes. Her bright bubblegum pink waist-length hair had been pulled back into a top-knot ponytail, her piercing emerald green eyes peering out from between her loose chin-length bangs. At least, that's what I like to believe. Like usual, she was dressed in a pair of really baggy dark red capri pants with a white sash wrapped around her slim waist with one end of it left to hang down to her knees in the front, a sleeveless dark red midriff-bearing top that hugged her upper torso snugly with her family's white ring emblem decorating the middle of her chest and upper back, dark red full-finger elbow-length gloves on her hands and forearms, black kunoichi sandals on her feet, and her hite-8 tied around her waist over her sash with a strip of dark red cloth. Set behind either hip was a basic equipment pouch while a single kunai pouch had been strapped to either thigh. Yeah, well, don't hold your breath. A more disgruntled voice spoke up from deeper amongst the branches on the other side of the tree. Leaning against a thick tree limb, Uchiha Sasuke kept his eyes closed and his arms crossed over his chest, dressed simply in a pair of black pants, a dark midnight blue turtleneck top with 3/4-length sleeves that fit him like a second set of skin with a cloth face mask attached to the collar that was pulled up over his nose and the Uchiha fan symbol decorating his back, and black shinobi sandals on his feet with a basic kunai holster strapped to his left thigh and an equipment pouch set behind his right hip. He's been like that for the past 9 years. I think that's about as cuddly as he's gonna get. People said the same thing about you, Sasuke-kun. Sakura countered with a smirk, her eyes glancing over to her teammate and old crush. Sasuke didn't open his eyes, but his brow knitted in a slight scowl without deeming her response worthy of a verbal retort. Thinking of something, Sakura frowned. He should have been back by now. It doesn't normally take this long. I'll bet my next paycheck that he went for another one of his runs. Sasuke remarked, making Sakura pout. No one in their right mind that knows him would take that wager. Sakura grumbled, that's a sucker's bet. At least I was never stupid enough to bet against him in the past. The Uchiha responded, getting an annoyed half-hearted glare from Sakura and an eye smile out of Kakashi. Elsewhere, Naruto was blurring through the heavy woodlands, letting the rushing wind deafen the chaotic storm of thoughts surging around in his mind as he pushed himself to his absolute limit. His claws ripped at the earth under his padded paw like feet with every step he took, his sharp-sighted eyes darting from one thing to another as he weaved through the trees, bouncing from tree trunk to help make any course alterations he made all the more easier and quicker without losing speed. Even though he was only a genin, a month out of the academy, Naruto was the fastest of his generation and even faster than most of the Chunin in the village. Launching himself from one last tree, Naruto took to the air as his feet left the crest of the cliff-faced hill, closing his eyes and letting the wind soothe him in its comforting embrace. Spiraling through the air as gravity slowly started to grab hold of him once more, Naruto shifted his center of balance with the help of his tail, waiting an extra second before finally opening his eyes. Twisting and flipping his body one last time, Naruto resisted the urge to hook his claws into the ground again as his feet made contact with the grassy slope of the opposing hill. The two split down the middle by a narrow river. Sliding down the slope, Naruto leaned back slightly before eventually falling to his back as he slowed down more than enough to stop. Just lying there, his chest heaving with each labored breath, Naruto just stared up at the partly cloudy sky with a blank look on his humanoid vulpine face, his arms stretched out to either side of him. As he laid there, his mind completely void of thought, Naruto slowly became aware of how his tail was twitching ever so slightly. Lifting a hand up, he lazily dropped it on his tail, trapping it under his padded palm to keep it from twitching anymore. He hated it, his tail. When it came to the people that knew him well enough, they could tell almost exactly how he was feeling at that moment based solely off what his tail was doing. Why did it have to be subconsciously controlled? Shaking his head as he got back to his feet, Naruto dusted himself off and started heading back towards the village. He'd deal with Kakashi lecturing him about leaving without permission tomorrow when they meet up in the morning. For now, though, he just wanted to go home. To keep from dealing with the villagers' glares of hatred and whispers of fear and distrust, Naruto kept to the rooftops, appearing as a mere blur of gray, orange, and red as he sped across them in the direction of his home, right along the far edge of the residential district near one of Konoha's largest and most heavily forested parks. It didn't take him long to reach his apartment building, easily balancing himself on the narrow metal guardrail lining the edge of the top floor balcony. Standing up straight and balancing himself on it as if he were standing on solid flat ground, Naruto boredly stalked along its length until he reached his door. Finally dropping from the railing as he fished his keys out of his pocket, Naruto unlocked his door and put them away, but didn't open the door right away. Inconspicuously using one of his claws, he hooked it on a thin, almost unnoticeable metal ring that was connected to a somewhat elaborate tripwire pressure plate combo trap that would go off the moment the ring was released from the door being opened. Had anyone opened his door without knowing about it, they would have been turned into a pincushion the moment they stepped over the threshold and into his apartment. It had happened a couple times in the past, thanks to the stupidity of his more zealous haters. The ones that openly debated the fact he was even human. The ones that swore he was the Kyuubi no Kitsune incarnate. Ear twitching and rotating slightly to focus in on a faint noise off to the side, Naruto smirked slightly without looking towards the source. Heading straight for the kitchen, he pulled out a bag from the cupboard and filled a small bowl with its contents. A soft mule came from the ground beside him before the being that made it hopped up onto the kitchen counter with weightless grace. Smiling warmly, he gently scratched the cat behind its ear as it sniffed at the food he had put out for it. "Sorry, Ren, I got a little sidetracked again." He quietly apologized to the pitch-black feline as it sat on its haunches and started eating, purring quietly as it did. Putting away the bag of cat food, Naruto went to his fridge and retrieved the container of leftover sushi he'd saved from last night's dinner. Leaning back against the counter beside his pet, Naruto ate his own food in silence, paying no mind to the emptiness that plagued his apartment. "Fuck you, Naruto." Sasuke growled out at his fiery red-orange furred teammate with a small glare, hissing in pain while Sakura rolled her eyes and finished tending to the multitude of minor scratches on his hands and face. Naruto, who had been staring off to the side, glanced over at Sasuke with a flat look, slowly blinked once, and then looked away again. As apathetic as he seemed, the slight twitch in his tail showed that he found a little enjoyment from Sasuke's discomfort. "It's because of you that we keep getting stuck with tracking down that damn little furball. You really think a fox is going to help us if it doesn't want to?" Sakura quipped in response, making Sasuke all the grumpier about his predicament while one of Naruto's ears twisted around slightly to focus in on what she was saying. Although she didn't notice it, Sakura still knew it was wise to watch what she said about her distant blue-eyed teammate. Even if she didn't think before she spoke. They're capricious and rather whimsical. If they see no point in something, they won't do it. You were just dumb enough to think Naruto would actually want to give us a hand, and really, Sasuke? A toy mouse? That was your foolproof plan to catch Tora? Came the Uchiha's trademark grunt as he glared off to the side, actually pouting a little at the mild chastising he was getting from the pinkette. Stuffing his bandaged hands in his pockets, Sasuke shuffled off to the other end of the balcony to brood in silence. Leaving Sakura behind in the middle of it, their wayward teammate crouched atop the railing at the other corner with his elbows braced on his knees. Glancing between the two, Sakura sighed quietly before deciding to try her luck again. "Hey, what are you thinking about over here?" she questioned softly with a warm smile, trying to be friendly, not that it really worked, anyways. "What importance are the thoughts of a fox to you?" Naruto shot back quietly, looking at her out of the corner of his eye as his ears flattened back and his tail slowly swayed from side to side cautioningly, the claws on his feet gripping the stone border he was perched on. Sakura flinched immediately at his response, feeling guilty for her choice of words a minute ago while talking with Sasuke. Shaking it off a moment later since it was quite common for him to take such small things very personally, Sakura sighed softly and turned around before leaning back against the rail a couple feet away from him. "I'm sorry, poor choice of words." I didn't mean to offend you. She sincerely apologized, keeping her eyes down on the ground as she spoke. The only signs that showed Naruto had calmed down were his claws releasing the stone rail and his tail no longer swaying, though his ears were still pinned back with agitation. I'll try to watch what I say next time. HMPH. That'll be the day. Naruto mumbled under his breath as he stood and stalked along the railing until he was near the middle of the balcony, his hands in his pockets as he stared out over the village of Konoha. Before Sakura could react to his words, Kakashi appeared not too far away in a puff of white smoke, alerting them to his sudden appearance via Shunshin. Not even looking at the man, Naruto was the first to speak. So, what's our next mission today? Painting another old man's fence or babysitting some merchant's spoiled brat again? Neither. I decided to reward the three of you with your very first C-rank mission. The silver-haired Junin returned with an eye smile as all three genin looked at him in surprise, though Naruto's eyes shined with curiosity more than anything. We've been hired on for a bodyguard job from here to Wave Country until our client has finished the construction of a bridge. We'll be gone for at least a couple weeks, so pack accordingly and meet me at the main gate in half an hour. Hi. Sasuke and Sakura acknowledged rather eagerly before they took off while Naruto stayed where he was, staring at Kakashi inquisitively, his head cocked to the side ever so slightly. I thought C ranks were only given out to Chunin. We're only rookie genin, so why the sudden change of pace? Naruto questioned as he crouched down so that he and Kakashi were more eye level with each other, his tail swaying once more, only with a barely contained eagerness to explore outside of Konoha's walls. I thought you of all people would have appreciated a new challenge. The Junin's answer made Naruto glare off to the side with a faint blush staining his cheeks beneath his fur and scarf. Chuckling for a moment, Kakashi shook his head slightly. I figured it was about time to put you three to the test. You've been doing pretty well in training, but you won't get much experience or realize your full potential if your skills aren't put to actual use. HMPH, whatever. He huffed while standing up atop the railing, turning back towards the village. After a moment of silence, though, Naruto turned his head ever so slightly, but not enough to look behind him. For what it's worth, thanks. Not many call me a person these days. Oh. Well? Kakashi trailed off when Naruto suddenly lunged from the railing and dropped to the rooftop of the shorter adjacent building, darting off to his apartment. You're welcome. They're all a bunch of brats. Tazuna grumbled, pausing to take a swig from the sake bottle in his hand. Especially the super hairy one in the back. Hey, are you even human? Naruto. Kakashi mumbled cautioningly to the genin in question, the teen's eyes having narrowed angrily on Tazuna instantly upon hearing his comment. Noticing the almost invisible shift in Naruto's body language, Kakashi lashed out to grab the boy, but he'd already moved. In the blink of an eye, Naruto closed the gap between him and Tazuna before coming to a full stop directly in front of the bridge builder. Their noses barely an inch apart as Naruto growled in his throat, his hands still stuffed in his pockets. Keep talking shit, old man. Naruto snarled quietly through his scarf mask, totally disregarding the sudden fear that filled the man's eyes. After a couple seconds, he let out another quiet growl before walking back to his place at the back of the group, ignoring the sharp-sighted glare he got from Kakashi. Let's just get going already. Alright, let's go ahead and get moving. We've got a good bit of walking to do before we reach Wave Country. Kakashi instructed with Sakura and Sasuke flanking Tazuna as the bridge builder started walking. Grabbing Naruto by the shoulder, Kakashi waited a moment before walking alongside the fox-like teen and speaking quietly so the others wouldn't overhear them. I know you deal with a lot of people treating you poorly because of your physiology, but next time you threaten a client like that, there will be consequences. Understood? Loud and clear, Scarecrow. Naruto quietly growled out, his eyes narrowed irritably as he jerked his shoulder out from under the Junin's hand. Walking a little faster to catch up to the others, Naruto left Kakashi behind him while drawing one of his kunai, idly twirling it on one of his fingers to help distract his mind from all of the hatred and abuse he'd been forced to endure since he could first remember. Why, he didn't know. Why did that snake fuck pick him for his twisted experiments? Why'd he have to take on the appearance of a fox, a creature that had become the symbol of hatred and pain to the villagers of Konoha? Why him? Why him? Catching the scent of something on the wind, Naruto was snapped out of his thoughts after getting a few miles down the road, his hand snatching the kunai in a reverse grip as his ears folded back and his eyes narrowed. As a quiet growl rumbled in his throat, Sasuke slid up beside him casually. However, if one looked close enough, they'd notice how his eyes were slightly narrowed as well, glancing from side to side in search of some kind of threat. "You noticed, too?" the Uchiha mumbled quietly, not really expecting a response from Naruto. He'd spent enough time around Naruto to learn the basics of how to read his body language. The moment Naruto stopped playing with his kunai, Sasuke knew immediately that the gut feeling he had was not just paranoia. Something wasn't right. "Poison. I can smell it," Naruto mumbled back quietly as he listened for anything out of place, his eyes still glancing around as his tail started to flick back and forth with agitation. He didn't like being hunted. "We're not alone anymore. Try to keep up, you two. We've still got a long way to go." Although he'd noticed the sudden tension in his two male students behind him, Kakashi didn't pay them any attention, instead reading his book. However, he was not oblivious to the cause. Slowing down just a little bit, Kakashi watched as Naruto and Sasuke moved a little quicker to catch up to Sakura and Tazuna, though he noticed how Naruto put at least one of his teammates between him and Tazuna. The boy really needed to chill about some things, though he understood why he held grudges. It wasn't long after that as they strolled past a harmless puddle off to the side of the road before the water started to rise up and take the form of two individuals. Both wearing a scarred Hite-8 of Kirigakure, the near-identical twins immediately moved to spring their trap. A bladed chain connected between their opposing clawed gauntlets. With a quick synchronized flick of their wrists, the chain was quickly wrapped around Kakashi before he could react and pulled tight, trapping him in place. "What?" Kakashi exclaimed as he was bound, catching everyone else's attention. Almost immediately, Sasuke and Naruto fell into their personal fighting stances while Sakura stood guard in front of Tazuna. "One down." One of the twins rasped out through his rebreather, his Hite-8 bearing two horn-like spikes on it. A moment later, they pulled as hard as they could, causing their chain to shred Kakashi's body into a half-dozen different pieces. "Kakashi-sensei!" Sakura cried out while Naruto, snarling angrily, rushed forward while channeling chakra into the knuckle spikes on his bracers. Instantly, twin sets of three crimson claw-like blades the same length of the average tanto extended from his knuckles. "Two down." The one-horned twin growled out as he and his brother flanked the charging, albeit strange, genin while lashing out with their bladed chain. They did not expect for the weird boy's blue eyes to flash red as he twisted his body into a horizontal lunging spin, his chakra-infused claws easily shredding their chain before they could wrap him up in it. Landing between them, Naruto immediately dropped into a crouch while kicking at the legs to one of them, forcing him to jump back. Capitalizing on it, Sasuke engaged the two-horned assassin while Naruto focused on the one-horned assassin. However, instead of fighting the genin, the twin assassins rushed to attack Tazuna, thinking the pink-haired girl guarding him would be easy prey. They weren't prepared for the fox-like teen to charge one of them at blinding speeds, planting a foot in the one-horned rogue's side before kicking off with enough strength to send him flying into a tree. Springing off of the one-horned Kiri rogue and launching himself towards the other, Naruto twisted his body into another horizontal spin, his claws outstretched. Unable to react in time, the two-horned nuke nin was bestowed a good number of cuts and gashes all across the front of his torso, his left arm, left side, and across the front of his thighs. "Arg!" The wounded assassin cried out painfully as he hit the ground and tumbled for a few feet while Naruto easily landed on his feet just beyond where the ambusher had been running. Just before he could press the advantage, Kakashi landed in front of Tazuna, totally unharmed, confusing and shocking his students along with Tazuna. "Nice work, guys. You did better than I had first thought." Kakashi praised casually with an eye smile, getting only an annoyed growl from Naruto as he retracted his claw blades. Ear twitching at a sound, Naruto kicked off the ground at full speed, slamming his right elbow into the one-horned rogue's chest hard enough to smash him back against the tree a second time, knocking him out with the force of the impact, along with cracking a rib or two. Still, what would two Kiri Chunin want with a simple bridge builder, I wonder? "Uchiha!" Naruto barked out before tossing a spool of wire at Sasuke, pulling one out for himself. As Naruto started binding the one-horned rogue, Sasuke moved to take care of the other, giving Kakashi and Tazuna time to talk for a moment in privacy as they stepped off to the side. Not feeling too nice at the moment, Naruto grabbed the assassin by the back of his top and started dragging him over to the other one, dropping him on his face carelessly and waking him up. "NGH. Fucking freak," the one-horned assassin growled out as he rolled over and glared at Naruto, angry that he'd been beaten so easily by a runt. Glaring right back at him, Naruto pulled his scarf down and bared his fangs at him in a snarl, snapping his jaws with a lurch. Startled by the sudden action, the one-horned assassin flinched back slightly, only to get kicked across the face by the tailed genin, nearly knocking him out again. Damn, you kick hard. Deal with them before I lose my temper and kill them." Naruto snarled at Sakura and Sasuke as he made his way across the path, leaning back against a tree with his arms crossed over his chest and head bowed with his eyes closed. He was slowly losing his eagerness to venture anywhere outside of his own apartment, let alone beyond Konoha's walls. "Hey, Naruto. How long have you had those claws?" Sakura inquired, trying to make small talk after a relatively silent journey for the past half-hour since they were dropped off by Tazuna's contact, who snuck them into Wave Country via his boat. "We've never seen you use them before during our spars or training sessions." "I've had them for a while, and I never used them in spars because there was no need for them." Naruto mumbled back in return, still a little on edge after having to deal with the Demon Brothers, as they were called, the day before. If there had been one assassination attempt, more were bound to be made. Especially after they learned the truth about why Tazuna wanted protection. Another reason why he was on edge was the sudden surge of power he felt during the fight. He didn't know what it was, but it made him just a little faster and stronger, his claw blades just a little sharper. It also sent his temper through the roof. He had a personal rule about killing, and just from a little taunting, he almost broke it. "Oh, so, are they built into your bracers or something?" Sakura asked out of genuine curiosity, eyeing her teammate's limited amount of armor. Naruto rolled his eyes as his tail stopped flicking from his rattled nerves, though his ears were still pinned back a little. "Something like that," he responded, his uneasy tone switching to his usual mildly annoyed tone, which was normal for him. He didn't really like people all that much. Holding one hand up a little and looking at it, a faint smile formed under his scarf in remembrance. "They were a gift from someone I know when I started attending the academy. They were made using Fuinjutsu so the blades can retract and extend on command." "Wow, it must have cost them a small fortune to get those for you." "Lucky," Sakura chimed with a smile, something that startled Naruto a little more than he had expected. He wasn't used to people smiling sincerely at him, and with his sense of smell, he could tell if someone was lying to him. It wasn't foolproof, but he could usually tell if someone had an ulterior motive or was trying to hide any ill intent from him. With Sakura, though, she was almost always sincere with him, even though she poorly worded some of her comments about him. That was when she smirked at him teasingly. "Got any other tricks up your sleeve that you haven't shown us yet? Stick around long enough and you might find out." Naruto mumbled quietly as he put a bit more distance between them, signaling the end of the conversation. It wasn't so much that the topic was annoying him, but more along the fact that he heard something out of place not too far away in the dense forested area flanking the cleared-out pathway they were taking. He couldn't tell for sure what it was, but it wasn't normal, not to him. As the tension in his muscles built up, Naruto reacted on instinct when a dried twig snapped, a kunai already flying free of his hand in the sound's direction. "What is it?" Kakashi inquired as Sasuke went to check the area the kunai had landed, only to return a moment later with a pure white rabbit held in one hand, the thrown kunai held in the other. Although Sakura was a little confused and Tazuna left clueless, the look Sasuke and Kakashi shared communicated the same thing going through Naruto's head as he pulled his scarf down a little. Sniffing at the air with his ears perfectly erect and twitching at the slightest noise, Naruto knew instinctively that they weren't alone any longer. That was when Kakashi saw Naruto's head snap towards one direction in particular, his eyes narrowed, ears folded back, and fangs bared in a slight snarl. He also caught sight of something else that made his lone visible eye snap wide open. "Everyone, get down." Not a moment later, a spinning object came flying at everyone at just the right angle in order to behead them all in a single pass. It would have, too, if Sakura hadn't tackled Tazuna to the ground while Kakashi did the same to Sasuke. Falling backwards and drawing his legs in, Naruto's back touched the ground just as the giant-bladed weapon reached him, only for the fox boy to suddenly kick out at the weapon's center and send it flying off course, embedding it high up in a tree off to the side. Kicking his legs a second time to spring back to his feet, Naruto didn't hesitate to draw his trench knives, fully prepared for a fight while the others got back up as well. Well, if it isn't Kiri's A-rank missing nin, Momochi Zabuza. Kakashi began rather casually, though it was rather obvious that the muscles under his skin were bunching up like a snake about to strike. Standing atop the giant blade buried in the tree trunk was the man in question, staring down at them from his perch on the Zanbatu's long handle. Everybody, get back. This one is on an entirely different level than those other two. I've got to say, no one's ever been able to catch on to me so fast, kid. I'm impressed, Zabuza remarked, ignoring Kakashi in favor of focusing his eyes on the strange fox child with the silver-haired Junin. I take it the ears and tail aren't for looks, huh? What's your name? Uzumaki Naruto. The blue-eyed fox boy growled out quietly, taking a moment to pull his scarf back up over his nose without taking his eyes off the man. A damn Zanbatu. He was strong, but not that strong. He would have to stay in constant motion because the moment he got caught by that blade, he was done for. He wouldn't be able to block that kind of weapon head-on. Then again, hit-and-run tactics were his forte. I'll be sure to remember that name. After I kill all of you, that is. Zabuza remarked in mock praise before his gaze hardened with bloodlust towards the end. Tensing his body as he grabbed the handle to his sword, Zabuza slid his gaze back from the fox-like genin to Kakashi, smirking slightly beneath the bandages wrapped around the lower half of his face while the silver-haired man pulled his Hite-8 up, uncovering his left eye. But it seems I'll have to deal with Sharingan Kakashi first. Sharingan? Sasuke thought to himself suspiciously, his narrowed eyes darting over to Kakashi for a moment before jumping back to Zabuza as the man kicked off the tree and lunged toward the small lake a dozen meters away from his position. Forming only a single seal with one hand while the other was raised above his head, Zabuza kept a cold gaze as the thin mist in the area started getting thicker and thicker. Kirigakure no Jutsu, was all the man said moments before he vanished from sight, the visibility dropping down to damn near 5 feet in front of them in seconds. Nervously chewing on her bottom lip, Sakura armed herself with a pair of kunai, her eyes darting back and forth while she, Sasuke, and Naruto stood in a protective triangular formation around Tazuna. Apart from spars with her teammates, she'd never been involved in an actual fight and, it scared her. No, it terrified her. Sakura, don't worry, I'll protect you guys even if it kills me. Kakashi reassured before glancing at her over his shoulder, eyes smiling at her. I don't let my comrades die. We'll see about that, Zabuza said from seemingly all around them within the mist, only for him to drop down from above in the middle of the group, his blade in hand and held across his back with Tazuna directly behind him and Naruto in front of him. It's over. Kumasora no ha senpu. Naruto snarled as he spun on one foot, twisting his body and kicking off the ground in an almost breakdance-style flip as his claw blades sprouted from his bracers and even his greaves. Instantly, Zabuza was slashed to ribbons by the almost instantaneous whirlwind of scarlet blades that retracted back into his armor pieces by the time his feet touched back down on the ground. However, Zabuza merely collapsed into water, having only been a Mizu Bunshin. Glaring down at the puddle of water, Naruto almost didn't hear Zabuza as he came up behind him, but he wasn't fast enough to react, the man's blade already in motion to cleave him in half. Focus. Kakashi barked out as he slammed his shoulder into Zabuza's sword arm, shoulder tackling the man back a few feet while stopping the sword short of hitting its mark. A kunai lodged in Zabuza's side where his kidney would be. As Zabuza, being another Mizu Bunshin, once again turned to water, Kakashi's eyes went wide when Zabuza entered his right peripheral field of view, sword already in mid-swing once more. This time, it was Kakashi to reveal himself to be a Mizu Bunshin as Zabuza's Zanbatu cleaved him in half at the waist. When Kakashi tried taking advantage of the opening by attacking Zabuza from behind, however, the rogue swordsman instantly lashed out behind him in the form of a powerful back kick, sending Kakashi flying a few meters before landing in the shallows of the lake. Pausing instead of pushing the advantage and going for Tazuna, Zabuza glared down at the Makibishi littering the ground between him and his target while Kakashi started getting back up. Just as he started wondering why the water felt strangely heavy, he realized his folly when Zabuza, the real one, burst from the water behind him, already going through hand seals. Suiru, the demon of the bloody mist, called out as he held one hand out towards Kakashi's back, only for the water around the Konoha Junin to encapsulate him in a sphere of water, trapping him in place. Hee, you almost had me there, Kakashi. Impressive, but not good enough. Now, sit back and behave yourself while I finish things up here. As his Mizu Bunshin turned away from the Makibishi, the three genin of Team 7 tensed up, each one unnerved for one reason or another. Sasuke was realizing just how far down the food chain he really was at the moment. Sakura was waging an internal war with herself, and Naruto. He wasn't exactly unnerved, he just felt like a cornered animal. Trench knives still drawn, he hunkered down a little bit more, keeping his center of gravity lower to the ground while raising his arms in a sort of boxer's guard. Wearing Hite 8 and acting like real ninja. In my opinion, someone doesn't become a ninja until they've survived brushes with death on numerous occasions. Zabuza's water clone taunted cruelly. Basically, once you get good enough to be put in my handbook, you can call yourself a real ninja. But you three are just a bunch of brats dressing up in your parents' old clothes. Immediately after finishing his statement, the Mizu Bunshin rushed Naruto before he could react, kicking him hard enough to launch him back while ripping off the Fox Boy's Hite 8 amongst the chaos. Keeping his feet under him as he slid to a stop, Naruto growled audibly with his head bowed, his arms still raised in a guard and crossed in front of him. Dropping the Hite 8 and stomping on it, Zabuza's clone sneered at the Fox Boy haughtily, bracing his sword on his shoulder. Get out of here, you can't beat him, his clone can't go far from his body, so just run and save yourselves. Kakashi shouted despite the water surrounding him, though he had to force himself from saying any more, lest he waste what little oxygen he still had. Shaking a little from the tension in his muscles becoming too great, Naruto slowly lowered his arms until his fists were on either side of his body at chest height, slowly lifting his head until his eyes were visible. Zabuza, with his clone mirroring him, flinched slightly upon seeing the uncontrollable fury that burned in his now crimson eyes. If you think I'm going to run like a scared animal with my tail between my legs, and risk being blamed for your death. Naruto hissed angrily as he started subconsciously flooding his body with enough chakra to form a dim blue-ish hue around his chakra-conductive trench knives, forearms, and forelegs. His scarf having dropped back down around his neck, Naruto's bared fangs were fully revealed as what looked like steam hissed out of his mouth in one sharp gust. A moment later, he surged forward much faster than his teammates had ever seen him move, appearing in front of the clone in mid-stride without slowing down in the slightest. Then you need to stop lying to yourself. Kage Bunshin, appearing in twin puffs of smoke on either side of him, Naruto and his two clones moved in perfect synchronization, the two flanking Fox genin pulling ahead and lashing out at either side of the Mizu Bunshin's upper body, their bodies spinning like razor-edged tops that shredded the Mizu Bunshin. Reaching the still airborne liquid remains of the Mizu Bunshin, Naruto formed a single handseal with his right hand, triggering a special trick he'd learned to do with his clones, causing them to instantly henge into a pair of foldable demon windmill shuriken. Grasping the unfurled giant throwing stars as he was drenched by the water from Zabuza's clone, Naruto threw himself into a spin before launching both weapons simultaneously. Tricky little brat, Zabuza snarled as he twisted his upper body to avoid the first one from cleaving through his unoccupied left arm and side before jumping up just enough to dodge the second that was aimed at his legs. However, with another half-seal from Naruto, both clones reverted back to their normal forms, either one already armed with twin handfuls of kunai. While still in midair, they loosed their volley of throwing knives at Zabuza's back, the Junin's eyes going wide with shock at how coordinated the boy was with his clones. As well as how strategic the boy was. Shit, he's never shown these kinds of tactics during team training. Kakashi thought to himself as Zabuza was forced to remove his hand from the Suiru to keep from being turned into a pincushion, freeing him in the process. Just what has he been hiding from us all this time? Never touch my Hite 8 ever again. Naruto snarled as he put his Hite 8 back on, his burning red eyes never leaving Zabuza as he did. I went through hell to get this thing and I won't let some punk-ass bastard take it away from me. And about surviving brushes with death? You know nothing about what my life has been like, so don't act like you know me. Looks like I struck a nerve. Zabuza growled out with a sadistic grin. His eyes narrowed with annoyance and bloodlust as he glared at the foxboy. His cheek bleeding from a minor cut caused by one of the kunai thrown at him. Good, because you struck one of mine, too, you fucking fox. Your fight is still with me. Kakashi reminded as he got between Zabuza and his team once more. A kunai grasped in one hand and his Sharingan eye still uncovered. Nice work, Naruto. But remind me later to have another talk with you about disobeying direct orders after I take out the trash. You arrogant motherfucker. Zabuza snarled angrily. I'm gonna make you eat those damn words. Where are you going? Kakashi inquired from his seat at the table, still recovering from his fight with Zabuza 2 days ago. Who they suspected to be alive still due to the circumstances revolving around the unknown supposed hunter nin that had shown up to finish the rogue swordsman. Naruto paused at the door for a moment, glancing back at the Junin over his shoulder. Does it really matter? I only do one specific thing in my free time and that's train, something Sakura and Sasuke are already busy with. The foxboy countered before facing forward again. Are you really going to reprimand me for doing the same thing as my 2 other teammates? No, just don't push yourself too hard this time. Kakashi admitted, letting the issue go without a hassle as Naruto left, closing the door behind him. Heading into the woodlands not far from the house, Naruto immediately took to the treetops, ricocheting from one tree to another at high speeds as he headed deep into the forest where he wouldn't be disturbed. He was still plagued with questions concerning his recent spikes in anger and power. Kakashi hadn't said anything recently, but in private, Sasuke and Sakura had both made comments about how his eyes had turned red during the fights with the demon brothers and with Zabuza. Was it the Kyuubi's doing, caused by the demon spirit's chakra that had been filtering into his body since the night of his birth? If so, why was it manifesting now of all times? If not the Kyuubi, then what was it? What was making him lose control of his temper so easily and causing the sudden bursts of raw, primal power? He needed to figure out what was causing it before it became a problem and got someone hurt. Coming to a stop near a small, shallow canal that fed a small lake, Naruto crouched down at the shore before dropping to all fours, dipping his muzzle-like mouth into the cool waters. It had been naturally filtered into fresh water, so he had no worries about it having adverse effects on him and it smelled clean enough to drink. It was while he was still drinking that his ears caught a sound nearby, making him freeze in place while his eyes jumped up to the opposite side of the lake. Kneeling down across the way was an admittedly cute-looking girl. Wearing a pink yukata with simplistic swirl-like designs scattered across the fabric, she was searching for something amongst the grass and brush. Going against his better judgment for some reason that escaped him, Naruto slowly retreated back into the tree line before stealthily moving closer to her, overly curious as to what she was doing. Eyeing the basket beside her, Naruto saw only a decent collection of what he guessed to be herbs, medicinal ones. When the wind suddenly shifted, Naruto caught her scent and immediately recognized it. She was that fake hunter nin. Eyes narrowing and ears folding back, Naruto slowly reached for a kunai. But his hand froze as he watched a bird land on the young woman's shoulder. Turning her head slightly to look at it, the girl suddenly smiled before the small avian flew off once more. What are you doing, Naruto? Stop hesitating. He mentally snarled at himself, his hand frozen in place just inches from one of his kunai holsters. Glaring down at the ground in thought, he idly noticed the patch of herbs at his feet, the same kind the girl was collecting. Don't even think about it. Excuse me, miss. Someone suddenly spoke up from behind her, startling Haku and making her stand up, turning around to face the new arrival. Eyes widening upon seeing only that foxboy from Konoha, Haku forced herself not to break cover, just in case he didn't know who she was. That's when she noticed the pile of small, leafy weed-like plants he had in his hands. Sorry for sneaking up on you. It's just, you missed a patch of them over there. Oh, thank you. She responded as she gently accepted the medicinal herbs from him, his clawed and fur-covered hand lightly brushing against her thumb. She idly noted how soft his fur felt. Putting them in the basket, she focused back on the fox boy, halfway feigning uncertainty due to his appearance, It was honestly a little unsettling, but nothing too bad. She bowed slightly, deciding to show some manners to keep up with her cover as a civilian girl. "I'm Haku, Naruto," he reciprocated, only a little hesitantly. She wasn't scared of him? Granted, she was the hunter nin with Zabuza, but there wasn't any fear or disgust or hatred towards him coming from her. You aren't bothered by my appearance?" "No, not really. If anything, you look kind of like a cute little red fox." Haku returned, complimenting him with a sincere smile. Internally surprised with herself, she watched his eyes perk up slightly at the comment, his eyes alight with curiosity and, was that hope? He must have had a hard life because of his appearance. Probably didn't have many friends, if any at all. Still, the way his ears perked up was kind of cute, making her giggle slightly in reaction. Thanks, I guess." Naruto mumbled a little awkwardly, his slight blush hidden by his fur and scarf as he looked away, scratching at the back of his neck. He didn't understand. She was his enemy, she obviously knew who he was. But he couldn't detect even the slightest bit of deceit from her. She was being wholeheartedly honest with her answers, and her body language told him that she was perfectly calm, if not the slightest bit tense. A little tension was to be expected, though, when someone was in the presence of someone that was supposed to be their enemy. Confused with his own actions even more, Naruto gestured towards her basket. Do you want some help? It'd certainly make things easier on me, but only if you want to." Haku answered, smiling at him again as she knelt back down to keep plucking more of the herbs. Internally, she was half expecting an attack while her back was turned, only for him to walk around in front of her and crouch down. Picking one of the leafy plants, Naruto pulled his scarf down a little and curiously sniffed at it. Definitely medicinal herbs, probably used for muscle aches and pains. A definite symptom of being put into a near-death state via acupuncture. When he suddenly sneezed from the scent being a little too intense, Naruto was surprised to hear her giggle again. "So, what brings you out here so early in the morning, Naruto-san?" "The only thing I ever really do anymore, training," he answered honestly, though his previously light-hearted mood became a little dampened. Haku noticed the sudden change in his mood, but decided not to pry too much. It might raise suspicions. "Training? You wouldn't happen to be a ninja, would you?" she asked curiously, feigning ignorance. Choosing to play along with her, he lightly tapped a claw against the Hite-8 plate he used for a belt buckle, nodding to wordlessly answer her question. "Wow, that's incredible. I've never met a ninja before. So, why were you training, if you don't mind me asking?" "To get stronger," Naruto answered, his response a little subdued by his change in mood. Excluding his knowledge of her being the hunter nin, he immediately picked up on the shift in her scent, denoting that she had just lied to him about having not met a ninja before. Even without his sense of smell, it was an obvious lie. To him, at least. "Why is that? You already seem plenty strong to me," Haku asked, honestly wanting to know. She wanted to know what drove him. Depending on his answer, she would make her final decision about him. Naruto hesitated for a moment, not really knowing why he felt compelled to tell her the truth. Depositing the herbs he had collected into her basket, Naruto sighed softly while getting back to collecting the medicinal herbs, avoiding eye contact with the girl as he answered. "I don't have much. I live in a shitty apartment with a stray cat I'd taken in a couple years ago. I don't have any friends. Most everyone in my village either hates me or they're afraid of me. Except for a very select few. I train in order to get stronger so that I can better protect what little I have." "I see," Haku mumbled softly, a little taken aback by his response. It was more than what she'd been expecting. She was also caught off guard by how familiar it was. A sad smile formed on her face as she mirrored Naruto, collecting the last few herbs around them. "A long time ago when I was still little, my mother told me that when someone has something important to protect, that is when they become truly strong. Yeah, an old man I look up to like a grandfather told me something similar when I was younger." Naruto responded knowingly, glancing over as Haku stood up with her basket in hand. "I think I've got all I need now. Thank you for the help, Naruto-san." Haku thanked him politely, bowing slightly out of respect as she smiled at him. "For what it's worth, I have no doubt that you are truly strong. Let's meet again someday." "Yeah," Naruto answered as he stood up while Haku started walking away. Before she got too far, though, she paused for a moment to look back at him. Also, I'm a boy. Haku lied, having spent a good long while trying to keep her gender a secret to everyone around her apart from Zabuza. Naruto simply smirked humorlessly, his eyes closed. No, you're not, he countered before tapping his nose, looking at her again as he smiled sadly. You can't fool my nose, Hunter-san. Have a good day. Haku was shocked into silence, watching as he simply walked away with his hands in his pockets. He knew? And yet he still. Haku paused for a moment, her opinion of the foxboy changing yet again. Even knowing that she was an enemy, he still helped her gather the medicinal herbs she needed to help Zabuza. Knowing she was an enemy, he had still been honest with her whenever she asked something. Granted, they hadn't exchanged any major details apart from their names, but a small smile formed on her face as she started walking back towards the hideout she and Zabuza were staying in. Tucking a few strands of her dark hair behind an ear, Haku made the journey back in a comfortable silence, her smile never leaving her face for the rest of the day. Later that night, Naruto laid back against the roof of Tazuna's home, staring up at the cloudless night sky, his hands tucked under his head with a blank expression on his face. He couldn't stop thinking about her. After they parted ways that morning, he doubled back towards Tazuna's so he wasn't quite so far away before getting around to actually training. While his teammates were working on the tree climbing exercise, he'd been working on his water walking technique, having learned the tree walking technique from a book he found in the shinobi library shortly after graduating from the academy. When he revealed that he'd known about her true identity, she'd been shocked and a little nervous, having been downwind of her at the time. What got to him, though, was the sudden change in her scent right after that. She seemed almost happy for a moment. Why, though? Why would she be happy that he knew who she really was? Sighing quietly, Naruto closed his eyes and decided not to think about it anymore. Even still, his mind wandered, circling around the young woman he'd met earlier. If things had been different, could they have really been friends? Forget about her, Naruto. She's the enemy, Naruto told himself. After a couple minutes, though, he opened his eyes again to stare up at the moon once more, the deep ache of longing making his chest tighten. Gripping his mesh shirt where the phantom pain was at its strongest, Naruto tensed his jaw. She's supposed to be the enemy, so why do I feel like this? Naruto, are you up there? Sakura called out from down below. Instead of answering, Naruto sat up and looked over the edge. Dinner's ready. Come eat. I'll be there in a minute. He answered solemnly before laying back down to keep staring up at the night sky, the pinkette frowning slightly before heading back inside. Recalling Haku's warm smile, the first one she'd given him, she wasn't scared of him, she didn't think he was a freak, she didn't hate him. She thought I looked cute. Sitting up and ruffling the short fur on his head with an exasperated groan, Naruto slowly dragged his hands down over his face. Sighing audibly into his palms, he smoothed his fur back out before finally getting up and dropping down to the boardwalk that wrapped around the quaint little home. Taking one last moment to recompose himself, Naruto tugged his scarf back over his nose while his ears folded back, like usual. Taking another deep breath to settle his rattled nerves, he walked inside to eat. NGH. Groaning slightly, Naruto sat up in the borrowed futon, still feeling sore from training himself into the ground after Inari's outburst last night. Noticing that he was the only one in the room they'd all been sharing, he glanced at the clock to see that he'd woken up a half-hour later than usual. Rubbing his face slightly, he sighed tiredly. Figures that they'd leave me behind. Getting up and getting dressed, Naruto went downstairs without speaking to a word to Tsunami and Inari. Once he'd set foot outside, though, he took off into a full sprint, intending to catch up to his team. Even now, though, Haku still plagued his mind. More specifically, her smile. She was only the sixth person to ever truly smile at him, and she was supposed to be his enemy. Thoughts broken as he smelled blood, Naruto came to a stop on a tree branch, sniffing the air to get an idea of where it was coming from. It wasn't human blood, but he wanted to investigate anyways. It only took him a moment to find the butchered remains of a boar, but it hadn't been done by a hunter. Couldn't have been dead any longer than a half-hour. Whoever killed this thing wasn't doing it for food. Naruto mumbled quietly to himself as he inspected the numerous cuts littering the carcass. Spotting something out of the corner of his eye, he looked up to find a handful of gashes carved into a nearby tree. A quick glance around revealed numerous other trees with the same kind of cuts on them, and they were leading back in the direction of Tazuna's house. They were all fresh, too. Eyes narrowing and lips curling into a slight snarl, Naruto pulled his scarf back up before sprinting back towards the house. Making it back in record time, Naruto easily spotted the two Ronin standing on the pier-like walkway leading towards the house, Tsunami having been taken prisoner by the pair. That stupid kid, Naruto thought in slight panic as he pumped chakra into his legs, surging forward at full speed as Inari ran at the two swordsmen, trying to save his mother. Inari! Tsunami screamed as the Ronin reached for their swords to cut down her little boy, only for the fear and panic to become too much for her. In that one instant, her vision went dark just as the Ronin drew their swords. Landing a few yards away from the two thugs, Naruto gently laid the unconscious Tsunami down with Inari, the trailing end of his scarf missing a few inches of scarlet fabric where the Ronin had cut through it instead of the child he'd saved. "Stay here," Naruto growled out at the boy as he stood up and turned to face the Ronin as they focused on him. Well, if it isn't the freaky fox ninja," the beanie-wearing Ronin taunted, only making Naruto's temper spike, his eyes flashing red for a split second. Both Ronin flinched back slightly in reaction, something that proved fatal for them when Naruto vanished from his spot, only to appear in the air between them in that same moment. Before they could react, Naruto's crimson claw blades extended from his greaves and bracers as he twisted his body in midair. "Kumasora no ha senpu," he snarled angrily as he slashed at the pair, but even in his rage, he held back just enough to leave them with an assortment of bleeding, but non-lethal gashes all over their bodies. Retracting his blades as he touched back down on the ground, Naruto jumped up again before kicking both Ronin in their faces, knocking them out. Forming a quick clone, he took off in search of his team once more while his doppelganger went about restraining the two Ronin, already knowing to stay with Tsunami and Inari, just in case. God damn it, Gato's making his move. I had to get to the others before. Before what, exactly? Before they got hurt? Before they got ambushed? Or, before they hurt someone else? Gritting his teeth with an angry, confused growl, Naruto simply pushed himself to move even faster. "Sasuke-kun," Sakura yelled as she hurled a kunai towards the collection of floating ice mirrors, hoping to somehow save or at least assist Sasuke, who was trapped within them. Unfortunately, the masked hunter Nin leaned out of one of the mirrors, catching the kunai before anything could happen. He caught it? The next instant, the masked ninja was knocked out of the mirror by a blur of gray, red, and orange that went up in smoke immediately after impact. Power sliding under the mirrors, Naruto stopped next to Sasuke, noticing the multitude of scratches and senbon he was littered with. Just as he was about to try getting him out of the dome of ice mirrors, Naruto's instincts kicked in, forcing him to whip around and swat a couple senbon out of the air using his bracer, glaring at Haku, but not out of hate. As she stepped into a mirror, Naruto readied his trench knives for a fight. "Over here," she remarked from behind them, shocking both of the genin. Naruto grit his teeth in frustration. She was faster than him. Sasuke, despite his surprise, didn't waste time running through a short string of hand seals. "Kaden. Gukakyu," he declared before spewing forth a cone of flame, intending to melt the ice mirrors with its heat. Sadly, it didn't work. "It did nothing?" Sasuke exclaimed in slight panic, his eyes wide with shock. "You can't melt my mirrors with that level of fire," Haku explained before readying a handful of senbon. In the blink of an eye, however, neither Naruto nor Sasuke had time to react as the needles shot at them from different angles, some merely scratching them while others embedded themselves in their bodies. Forcing himself back to his feet, Naruto yanked out the lone senbon stuck in his left thigh and tossed it aside before forming a hand seal. "Trying to follow with your eyes is impossible. You will never be able to catch me. Don't tell me what I can and can't do." "Cage Bunchin," he fox-teen snarled as a dozen clones of himself appeared, each one and himself lunging for a mirror. Once again, Haku struck, destroying them all in an instant. While they'd done nothing to Haku, Naruto had realized something as he hit the ground. Whatever it was that made Haku so fast, his clones had been hit in sequential order, popping one after another. Not all at once. That ruled out her using any kind of clone techniques or some kind of instantaneous area attack. Growling louder than before as he forced himself to stand back up, Naruto became uncaring of the scarf as it slipped off his face, his lips curled into a fanged snarl. You're moving between the mirrors. That's how you're doing it. You figured it out already. Haku mumbled just loud enough for them to hear, actually a little impressed. Even if you know that, it won't help you. I don't need to know how you're moving so fast to stop you. Naruto barked out in retort, his teeth gnashed angrily. That is, until a handful of senbon embedded themselves in the back of his legs, dropping him to his knees with a stifled cry of pain. Becoming a true ninja is difficult for me. If possible, I don't want to have to kill you or for you to have to kill me. But if you come at me, I can bury my heart long enough to put you down. Haku admitted, a touch of heartache softening her tone as she stared at the foxboy she'd befriended. Why did it hurt so much, seeing him in pain? Reinforcing her resolve, Haku readied another handful of senbon. This bridge is the place where we fight, to connect to our dreams. Me, for mine, and you, for yours. Please, don't hate me. I want to protect someone precious to me. To work for that person. To fight for that person. To make that person's dreams come true. That is my dream. Naruto growled again as he yanked out the last needle stuck in his legs, which were weakened by the shards of metal. Thankfully, his healing factor was slowly returning strength to them, but not fast enough. Forcing himself back to his feet, Naruto glared up at the masked girl's nearest reflection. Unknowing of the fact that it was the mirror Haku was actually inhabiting at the moment. For that, I can become a true ninja. Haku continued, hardening her heart even more. For that, I can kill you. Seeing Haku tense up, Sasuke tried to dodge to the side, only to be stopped before he could move by a senbon going through his lower leg just under his knee. The split second that followed, he and Naruto both were pelted with senbon, but Naruto took the worst of it. For some reason, it seemed like the masked ninja was focusing on him. Yeah, Naruto was fast, but that was about all he had going for him apart from being good with kunai and his trench knives. Glancing over his shoulder at the foxboy, Sasuke watched as Naruto simply refused to go down, his limbs shaking with effort as he kept ripping senbon out of his body, glaring and snarling at the ice mirrors the whole time. He really was a fighter. Still, he was slowly being able to predict where the hunter was going to strike next. It wasn't perfect and he still got hit with half of the needles thrown at him, but he was getting better the longer the fight went on. Unfortunately, he didn't know just how much longer he'd be able to last. He and Naruto could both hear Kakashi and Zabuza fighting outside of the dome where the mist was at its thickest. They could only hope that Kakashi won his fight before they lost theirs. You moved pretty well, Haku praised coldly, only to draw another handful of senbon. But this time, I'll stop you. He's coming. Calm down. Concentrate. Sasuke mentally told himself, his eyes wide open as he watched vigilantly for the signs of the next attack. A split second later, the hunter moved. And see through it. In that moment, Sasuke threw himself across their little arena, completely dodging Haku's attempted stab at him, another volley pelting Naruto to keep him immobilized. She was shocked. He'd seen her attack coming, but how? As he picked himself off the ground and glared back at her, Haku saw the reason why. His Sharingan had finally awoken. Jumping back and melting back into a mirror, Haku prepared another collection of throwing needles. Panting lightly from pushing himself so hard, Sasuke could finally see the masked ninja's movements. Not fully, but just enough to give him a better chance. He risked a quick glance at Naruto to see him still stuck on his hands and knees, fresh senbon sticking out of his body. He didn't know how much longer he was going to last in the fight, but if he went down, then Naruto didn't stand a chance. As his eyes darted back towards the mirror Haku had gone into, Sasuke failed to realize that he had just given Haku what she needed, a weak point to finally bring him down. I see. You're also from an advanced bloodline, Haku commented, her tone still just as cold as the ice she controlled. I'll have to end this quick. This technique uses a lot of chakra. The longer this fight takes, the better your chances of surviving, but I'm not going to give you the chance. This is the end. With that, she lunged from her mirror, feigning an attack aimed at Sasuke before redirecting towards Naruto at the last second. Sasuke's eyes went wide in shock, his body moving on autopilot as he pushed himself to move as fast as he could. From his spot, Naruto looked up just in time for Sasuke's shadow to fall over him. Across from the dark-haired teen was Haku, knocked prone after being intercepted by Sasuke. All you ever do is make things so much more difficult for everyone else. Sasuke rasped out, most of the senbon he'd been hit with focusing around his neck, a pained look of fear slowly creeping onto Naruto's face as he shakily reached out towards Sasuke. What's with that look? Sasuke, you. Naruto trailed off just before Sasuke fell over, the fox boy barely managing to catch him before he could hit the ground. His eyes went wider yet as he noticed the glazed look in Sasuke's eyes. He was already gone. You stupid idiot. He managed to hit me and without flinching, died to protect you. Haku muttered as she forced herself into a kneeling position, although a bit shakily from using so much chakra. To protect a precious person, knowing it was a trap, he still jumped in front of you. He's a shinobi that deserves respect. Naruto didn't move, staring at the unmoving form of his teammate. His friend, jaw tensing and his grip tightening, Naruto couldn't focus properly. He was too busy fighting the raging inferno building up inside of him, a trickle of blood dripping from the corner of his mouth as he gnashed his teeth hard enough to make his gums bleed. Standing up fully, Haku stood there for a moment. Even now, even after everything she'd done, her chest still hurt. Why? Why was this causing her just as much pain as it was him? Why him? Is this the first time you've lost someone close to you? She continued speaking, leaning back and sinking into another mirror. This is what it means to be a ninja. Shut up, he rasped out as he gently laid Sasuke down, closing the Uchiha's eyes with one hand before weakly standing up, driven solely by his emotions at the moment. His head was bowed, his ears folded back out of emotional agony and unrelenting fury, his hands balling up into fists. You dare preach about precious people and true strength when you have the nerve to kill someone else's precious person. Haku was silenced, however, before she could really start. I said shut up. Naruto roared as red-orange chakra suddenly exploded from his body, swirling around him like a storm, the image of a roaring fox's head appearing above him that truly frightened Haku. Not only that, but right before her eyes, she watched his wounds heal, her senbon forced out of his body as his flesh knit itself back together. He didn't deserve to die. He still had a dream to accomplish. It should be me laying there right now, not him. And why is that, Naruto? Haku asked, her emotional mask cracking. Why should you be the one that's dead and not him? Because I don't have a dream. Naruto snapped, shocking Haku with his words as the red-orange chakra sunk back into his body as his fur became ruffled, the hairs standing on end as his tail flicked back and forth furiously. Blood dripped from his hands as his claws dug into his palms, trench knives left forgotten on the ground. Me and him never did see eye to eye. We never got along. You could say we damn near hated each other, but he didn't deserve this. For killing him, I'll kill you. Ears twitching slightly as Haku readied more senbon to protect herself with, Naruto's head suddenly snapped in her direction, looking directly at her with his blood-red eyes. She flinched, caught off guard by the sheer extent of the malice they held. It gave him all the time he needed, the ground under his feet cracking from the force of him taking off at full speed, appearing in front of her mirror instantly. She tried to jump from her mirror to another, but the moment she popped out, Naruto's fist had already made contact with her masked face, smashing her back into the sheet of ice. Launched back a good dozen feet, Haku rolled to a stop on the ground while the rest of her mirrors cracked and broke, falling to the ground to shatter in a deafening roar of breaking glass. Naruto didn't hear any of it, his eyes locked on Haku as she started standing back up, his chest heaving with each labored breath. All he could see was red. Having more to say, though, he restrained himself from killing her right away. You stole my heart yesterday. Naruto growled out through gnashed fangs as tears started falling from his ruby eyes, Haku's eyes widening at the revelation as her mask cracked and broke, falling away from her face. Both literally and figuratively. Even as he spoke, he walked closer to her with purpose, his anger still burning strong. You stole it, and then you ripped it apart right in front of me. Haku didn't have the chance to react before Naruto's fist smashed against her face a second time in the form of a backhand, sending her skidding across the ground a second time. He walked over to her prone body, standing over her as she stared up at him with pained eyes, tears of her own welling up. Sitting on her stomach to keep her from going anywhere, Naruto cocked his fist back again. I'll kill you. he rasped out as he swung his fist again, Haku's eyes closing as she waited for the embrace of death. However, not feeling the impact or any pain, but hearing his fist hit something, she opened her eyes again. He'd hit the ground beside her head with enough power to put spiderweb cracks in the stone. His fur smoothed back out and his eyes shifted back to their bright blue coloring, his tears flowing even stronger this time. He sat there, staring at her and shaking. They sat there in silence for a minute before he finally squeezed his eyes shut, leaning forward as a sob tore through him. I can't do it. Haku could only stare at the crying fox boy on top of her, unable to think of what to do. He just confessed his feelings for her, if they could be called that, and admitted that he couldn't kill her, even in his enraged state. Slumping forward until his forehead was pressed against her chest, Naruto continued to cry, continuously muttering, "I can't do it," under his breath between sobs. Hearing a shrill chirping of some kind further down the bridge, Haku felt in her gut that Zabuza was in danger, but she was too weak to move the boy off of her. Starting to cry just as heavily as the boy on top of her, Haku shakily wrapped her arms around Naruto, holding him tight. She couldn't do anything to save Zabuza. She couldn't do anything. As the shrill chirping came to an end and the mist began to thin, Haku kept her eyes squeezed tight, holding on to Naruto for dear life. What was she going to do with herself now? Having not had a dream of her own, with the exception of achieving Zabuza's, what was she going to strive for now? She no longer had a reason to live, a reason to fight. All she could do now was hold on to the fox boy, hold on to Naruto, and cry. Coughing and gasping for breath as he continued crying, Naruto felt her arms around him and the warmth of her body against his, but as soothing as it was, it did little to console him. As the mist thinned more, gradually fading away now that it was no longer being supplied with chakra, a steadily growing mass of shadows could be seen at the other end of the bridge. Kakashi, hands soaked in Zabuza's blood, turned to look at the new arrivals just as the mist cleared up enough to reveal Gato and his small army of thugs. He tensed his jaw and narrowed his eyes, having used up too much chakra in his fight with Zabuza to be able to take them all on his own. Well, it seems they not only failed to do what I wanted them to, but got themselves killed as well. Gato remarked irritably before smirking smugly. Oh, well, saves me the trouble of finishing them off myself. So much for the demon of the bloody mist, eh? The remark earned him a collection of laughter from his thugs, the sound being loud enough to make Naruto's ear twitch and swivel around towards them, his sobs dying down and tears drying up. Enemies. A lot of them, from the sound of things. Still crying herself, Haku wasn't willing to let go of him as Naruto started to stand up, but her arms were too weak to keep him there. Finally opening her eyes and looking up at him, she saw the look on Naruto's face gradually shift from one of pain and anguish to focused anger, his ears folding back again as he started walking. She watched him walk over to where they'd been fighting earlier, picking up his trench knives. At least he did one thing right. He wore out all of you enough that my men here can finish cleaning house. Gato gloated before tapping his cane on the floor. Get them, boys. I can't kill her. Naruto growled out as he walked past Kakashi, the army of thugs having just started to move as he did. His grip on his trench knives tightened as he snarled. But I can kill all of you. Naruto, don't. Kakashi tried to stop his student, reaching out to grab him before he could do anything stupid, but Naruto had already taken off, forming a single handseal as he did. Cage Bunchin, he shouted as a dozen clones of himself popped into existence alongside him in clouds of smoke. The thugs and bandits were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the strange fox-like teens, hesitating for just a second. It was all the time Naruto needed for him and his clones to clear the distance between them. Moving too fast for any of them to react properly, Naruto and his clones weaved through their ranks, their silver metal fangs slicing through their bodies like water. Their screams of pain and fear echoed all along the bridge, terrifying Gato as his men were cut down without mercy or hesitation. He turned and started running towards the incomplete end of the bridge, trying to get to one of the boats so that he could flee. Going somewhere? Came the growling inquiry from behind him, causing Gato to turn around to find one of the fox-like men standing there, his trench knives dripping with blood. Tripping over a piece of construction material as he tried to back away from him, Gato fell to the ground with a cry. Having left his clones to deal with the riff-raff, Naruto glared down at Gato as the short, pudgy man tried crawling away. You are the source of the famine that has plagued this county. You've killed innocents in your greed. Spare me. I'll give you anything you want, just don't kill me. Gato cried out in panic, only for Naruto to grab him by the collar of his suit and lift him up, his legs kicking as his feet lost touch with the ground. Money. I have lots of money. I can pay you. Just let me live. You can't buy my mercy. Naruto whispered before drawing a hand back and slamming his bladed fist into Gato's neck, letting him go at the same time. Instantly, the tyrannical tycoon was relieved of his head, his body thudding to the ground while his removed cranium sailed through the air and plummeted to the sea down below. Wiping the blood from his knives on Gato's body, Naruto holstered them and turned around, shambling back towards the others just as his clones finished off the last of the thugs, dispelling once the last one fell. Kakashi could only stand there in silence, watching his student. He just witnessed the boy make his first kill 100 times over, and while justifiable, it was still quite worrisome for the Junin. Shuffling past Kakashi, Naruto stopped and slowly looked up to see Sakura tending to Sasuke, who was sitting up now with her help, the senbon removed from his body. Relieved, he let out a shaky breath. We're going back to the house. Naruto mumbled to the Junin before he started walking again, leaving the shell-shocked Junin in his wake as he made his way back to Haku. Dropping to his knees beside the still-crying girl, Naruto struggled for a moment before managing to pick Haku up in his arms, standing as she tightly wrapped her arms around his neck and shoulders. He ignored everyone around him, even the horde of villagers up ahead as he shuffled on. Sasuke was alive. The town was safe again. Gato was gone. Zabuza was gone. Don't worry, Haku, he thought to himself as he walked, everyone moving out of the way to give him room. Eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, he leaned his head down as he moved on autopilot, burying his nose in Haku's hair and breathing in her scent, hearing only the sound of her sobbing as she buried her face against his neck and chest. As he walked, a light showering of snowflakes began to fall. I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. 3 days later, Kakashi contemplated what to do about Haku. He tried talking to Naruto about it, but the teen had become extremely protective of her. He wouldn't even let anyone be in the same room as her without him present. The two of them had taken up residence in one of the only other spare rooms in the house while everyone recovered from the battle. Not only that, but Haku had been unresponsive since the battle. The only person she'd react to was Naruto, and even if the boy wasn't overprotective of her, she wouldn't go anywhere or do anything without him by her side. She only spoke to him, if she spoke at all, and would only eat if Naruto was there with her. He'd thought about his options, but with how things were going, he didn't have very many. Sasuke, Sakura, I have a favor to ask of you. Kakashi spoke up from his spot, the three of them currently in their shared room. The two males present were recovering from their injuries while the lone female, Sakura, helped tend to them. Once he was certain he had the full attention of both genin, he continued. I want you to exclude Haku from your reports when we get back to Konoha. Officially, she has no affiliation with Zabuza or Gato or anything else that happened here. Am I clear? Hi. Sasuke mumbled out in response, a little put off by the request, but he wasn't about to try fighting it. There wasn't a reason to, anyways. So long as she didn't try anything stupid, he didn't care. She was Naruto's responsibility now. Seeing as Sasuke had agreed with it, Sakura reluctantly did the same, nodding her confirmation to Kakashi from her spot. Groaning slightly as his healing wounds ached and stung, Kakashi forced himself to his feet before grabbing his crutches, hobbling off to find Naruto to tell him the same thing. Reaching the door to the room the fox boy was staying in with Haku, Kakashi sighed softly before knocking. After a moment of waiting, the door slid open enough to reveal the genin in question. What do you want, Scarecrow? Naruto mumbled cautiously, his ears folded back and eyes narrowed slightly. Kakashi sighed once more, at least he had stopped calling him Hitaki. I just came to let you know that I've asked the others to leave out Haku's involvement in everything. He answered, getting a surprised look from Naruto before it became suspicious once more. Before he could say anything, Kakashi held his hands up placatingly. No strings attached, no ulterior motives, nothing of the sort. She is, essentially, a free woman now. Officially, she'll have no affiliation with anything that's happened here in Wave Country. If she wishes to come to Konoha with us, we'll just say that you met her after everything happened and that she wanted to come back to the village with us. Okay?" Naruto was silent for a moment, glancing off to the side in thought. Closing his eyes, Naruto started to slide the door shut. "Thank you, Kakashi-sensei." "Anytime, Naruto." Kakashi muttered softly with a sad smile even though the door was already closed. Turning back around, he hobbled back to the room to get some more rest. Sighing quietly in relief as he finally stepped away from the door, Naruto turned around with a sad smile as he looked at Haku. She was curled up on the futon, her back to him as she stared at the far wall blankly, tears still falling from her eyes. She'd had another nightmare about Zabuza. Walking over and sitting down beside her, Naruto reached over before pulling the surprisingly light girl into his lap, wrapping his arms around her comfortingly. Reacting to his touch, Haku's lips quivered slightly before she calmly buried her face in the fur on his chest, her tears flowing more freely as she curled up in his lap, shivering slightly. Grabbing the blanket and pulling it over the both of them, Naruto hesitated for a moment before gently taking one of her hands into his own, gingerly running his thumb across her knuckles. Instantly, she squeezed his fingers in return, a quiet choked sob escaping her as she closed her eyes, crying into his chest. Eyeing the bandages wrapped around her wrist, Naruto knew that the pain and sorrow he'd felt when he thought Sasuke had been killed paled in comparison to the agony Haku was in over Zabuza's death. She'd tried to commit suicide the first night by taking one of his kunai and cutting her wrist. Thankfully, he'd caught her almost immediately and stopped the bleeding. She had refused to leave his side ever since then. "Did you hear him, Haku? You're safe now," he whispered to her as he buried his nose in her hair, holding her a little tighter as he closed his eyes. Faintly nodding her head in response, she stayed silent while shifting slightly and curling up a little more in his arms, getting a little more comfortable on his lap. Smiling weakly despite her tears, Haku nuzzled his bare chest in relief. Now, she could focus on grieving over the loss of the only person that had ever taken an interest in her. Before she met Naruto, that is. After he had stopped her from killing herself, Haku had finalized her opinion of the fox boy currently holding her. He said he didn't have a dream back on the bridge. She herself didn't have one, either. Thus, she decided that she was going to help him find one. That was her dream now. She found it funny and quite ironic, though. Haku had always thought of herself as a timid little rabbit since she was a kid, and yet here she was, falling in love with a fox. As her tears started to dry up and her breathing evened back out, Haku smiled slightly as she nuzzled Naruto's chest again. Between the emotional exhaustion and the warmth and softness of Naruto's fur, Haku slowly began to doze off in his arms. "How's she holding up?" Kakashi inquired as he walked up next to Naruto, the fox boy leaning back against a tree in the shade as he watched over Haku from a distance, a week and a half having passed since the battle on the bridge. She was visiting Zabuza's grave for only the second time since he'd been buried, the hill they were on overlooking the bridge they'd all fought on as it neared completion. A few more days and they'd be getting ready to return to Konoha. "Better. She still has nightmares, but I don't think those are going to stop for a little while longer." Naruto answered softly, his eyes never leaving Haku as she knelt down in front of the marked grave. Maybe he should look into getting the man an actual grave marker someday. It might help cheer her up a little bit, knowing he had a proper one. She hasn't made any more attempts to take her own life, thankfully. I guess I managed to get through to her the first time. She certainly looks a lot happier than she was before. Kakashi commented, the pair watching as Haku glanced back towards Naruto to make sure he was still there. She smiled when she saw him, though it faltered slightly when she saw Kakashi before turning back towards the grave marker, still talking to the deceased man. Naruto smiled sadly, though he really was glad that she was starting to find a little bit of happiness again. She was finally coming to terms with everything. I take it she's decided to come with us to Konoha? Yeah, she's already collected all of her belongings from their old hideout. Naruto's smile cheered up a little as he thought about her coming with them, only for his mind to wander slightly. Which reminds me, I've got to clean up my apartment and see what I can do about getting her settled in. Oh, moving a little fast, don't you think? Kakashi teased lightheartedly, getting a cautioning look from Naruto. Laughing quietly, he waved his ire off dismissively. I'm joking. Relax. I honestly think it'll do her a lot of good to move in with you when we get back. Might do you some good, too. Hopefully, she'll make you a little friendlier. What's that supposed to mean, Scarecrow? Naruto growled out defensively, glaring at the taller man a little from his spot. Kakashi simply chuckled again before turning to leave. Snorting slightly as the man walked off, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and focused his attention back to Haku. He hoped to get her well enough that he could get back to training regularly again. He got restless easy when he wasn't busy training or doing missions. Although, he had noticed a change in himself recently. While he'd been preoccupied with keeping an eye on Haku, Naruto hadn't felt the slightest bit restless, even now after the worst of the storm had passed, in his opinion. So long as he was with her, he felt quite calm and relaxed. It was nice. Naruto-kun, you okay? Haku suddenly asked, snapping him out of his thoughts. Blinking owlishly as he noticed she was standing in front of him, Naruto figured he must have zoned out for a minute, lost in his thoughts. Yeah, I'm alright, I was just thinking, he reassured, noticing the rather well-hidden look of concern and worry in her chocolate brown eyes. Smiling slightly, he reached over and put a hand on her head, making her blush slightly. Ready to go? She hummed out with a smile, something that made him happy. Last time, she'd left in tears. Pushing away from the tree, Naruto was about to start walking with his hands in his pockets when Haku suddenly wiggled her way under his arm, leaning into him with her arm wrapped around him in return. Looking at her curiously, he only got a shy smile and flushed cheeks from Haku. Sighing slightly, he smiled and shook his head at her slightly. At least she was happier now. So, what were you thinking about? About how happy you looked this time. He answered honestly, making Haku blush shyly and halfway bury her face against his chest and shoulder, but she was still smiling a little. I was also thinking about something else. It's in regards to when we get to Konoha. Oh, what is it? She got a little nervous, hoping it wasn't anything bad. I was thinking about, sleeping arrangements. Naruto mumbled out with a heavy blush, looking off to the side awkwardly. He wasn't the only one, but with half her face pressed against his chest, he wasn't aware of the faint smile on her lips. I've only got the one bed and it's not all that big, so I was wondering if you'd, prefer if I got another for you to sleep in or something. Actually, I've gotten pretty used to sleeping next to you. She admitted sheepishly, blushing heavily still as she avoided eye contact. Smile growing a little bigger, she leaned back into him fully. So long as there's enough room for us to both sleep comfortably, I'm okay with it. Besides, having you next to me at night helps whenever I start having bad dreams. Yeah, Naruto's smile slipped a little bit at the thought, recalling how she often woke up in the middle of the night in tears. She'd even woken up screaming a couple times. Every time, she'd spend anywhere from a few minutes to an hour crying into his chest from them before finally falling back asleep. Thankfully over the past week, they'd been ever so slowly dropping in intensity, but like he'd told Kakashi, he didn't think they'd stop for a while longer. She'd spent a good portion of her life with Zabuza, after all. Hey, only I'm allowed to be mopey right now. Haku mumbled with a slight pout, poking his cheek as she stared up at him, being a few inches shorter than him. Snorting at the girl's reasoning, Naruto smirked before lightly kissing the top of her head. Instantly, Haku's cheeks went bright red while he himself was kind of shocked by what he did. Sure, they'd been rather close recently, but why would he just suddenly do that? On reflex, at that? Half expecting her to get upset, Naruto played it off while waiting for her to throw a fit or something, but she just leaned back into him, holding him a little tighter as they walked. As they took the path to Tazuna's home that avoided the town, Naruto struggled to calm down, his cheeks burning and heart beating a tad fast. Having had her ear to his chest, Haku could hear his heart start racing after he kissed the top of her head. It brought a truly happy smile to her face. He was just too cute and adorably awkward sometimes. The last few days in Wave Country went by quietly as Sasuke got back to doing some light training, Sakura still keeping an eye on him since he was still experiencing some muscle weakness. Kakashi was healed for the most part and had taken over guarding Tazuna the last few days while the bridge was finished, leaving Naruto and Haku to essentially do as they pleased. Even still, Haku had started getting a little restless and took it upon herself to help Tsunami around the house while Naruto occupied himself on Akushin with some simple chakra control exercises. Once they'd all parted ways from Wave Country, it didn't take them long to get to Konoha now that they no longer had to go at a civilian's pace. Getting in had been a slight hassle, however, seeing as Haku hadn't possessed any sort of identification papers or anything. Because of it, his teammates had gone ahead to report to the Hokage while he took Haku to remedy the issue. While she'd been busy, Naruto had thought ahead to send a couple clones to his apartment to make sure nothing had been messed with while he was gone and to clean up a little. He wasn't exactly a messy person, but he wasn't exactly neat, either. Once it had all been taken care of, he led her to their apartment. "You, booby-trapped your apartment?" Haku mumbled, a little concerned about it. Naruto didn't say anything at first, thankful that one of his clones had managed to remove the little bit of graffiti that had been spray-painted onto his door. The last thing he needed her to see right now were the names everyone liked to call him. "Does it have something to do with the looks everyone keeps giving you?" "Something like that," he muttered quietly while opening the door, letting her go in first. Closing and locking the door without rearming the trap, Naruto started undoing the straps to his harness, stripping out of his equipment and scarf before hanging it all up on a couple wall hooks near the front door with the exception of his trench knives. He always kept those nearby. When he turned away from his things, he found Haku giving him a worried look. "I don't want to talk about it right now, Haku. It's kind of a touchy subject for me." "Okay." Walking into the kitchen, Naruto winced slightly as he picked up the underlying tone of disquiet sympathy for him in her voice. While he was busy, Haku decided to take a look around the small apartment. The den had only a couch that looked like it had seen better days and a small coffee table that had a few stains on it. The kitchen was simple and open, having a plain-looking wooden dining table with 2 chairs, a stovetop oven, a fridge, and a microwave off to the corner. Next to the kitchen was a small hallway that most likely led to the bedroom and bathroom. Still able to faintly smell cleaning chemicals, Haku smirked slightly, knowing Naruto had probably sent a clone or 5 to do some quick cleaning. Hearing a quiet mewl before something landed on her shoulder, Haku ducked down slightly in surprise before finding an all-black cat standing there. "I see you've met Ren." Naruto spoke up from the kitchen as he walked over with 2 cups of tea. "You know, you can sit down." Haku simply hummed quietly as she smiled, pulling the cat from her shoulder and holding it as she walked over to the couch, scratching Ren under the chin. Sitting down next to her after setting their drinks down on the table, Naruto leaned back and ran a hand over his head. "Sorry if there isn't much to do right now. Like I said before, I don't really do much outside of training." He apologized, lightly scratching the back of his ear as he glanced off to the side. "That and I usually don't ever have company over." It's okay." Haku reassured as she kept petting Ren, the cat purring happily as it curled up on her lap. "It'll probably take me a little bit to readjust, anyways." "Well, do you want to unpack or something?" Naruto inquired, actively trying to find something to do that might help pass the time. Haku thought about it for a second before taking a sip of her tea. It wasn't bad, but it left a lot to be desired. "It's not like I have a whole lot of stuff, Naruto." Haku responded while holding up the single storage scroll that held all of her belongings. "It's mostly just equipment, a couple replacement outfits, medical supplies, and rations." "Oh," he mumbled while slouching to the side a little, closing his eyes as he tried thinking of something else. That was when he felt Haku lean against him, Ren running off to wander the apartment again. Looking down at her, Naruto saw only the small, content smile on her face as she drew her legs up onto the couch, her head resting on his chest. "Let's just lay here for a little while and relax a bit longer, okay?" Naruto didn't try to argue. Instead, he had her sit up for a second while he got a little more comfortable, stretching out on the couch a little more with Haku laying between his legs. Smiling a little more than before, Haku wrapped her arms around him and went to nuzzle his chest, only to feel the slightly abrasive netting from his top. Sitting up with a pout, Haku looked at the foxboy while tugging at his mesh shirt. "Take it off." "What? Why?" Naruto questioned, his cheeks reddening. It's not like it did much to hide anything, but the way she said it made him hesitate. When her pout was then accompanied by a slight glare, he finally relented with a sigh before tugging the top off. Even going so far as to pull his gloves off, Naruto deposited them on the floor next to them. Satisfied, Haku smiled again while leaning against him once more, sighing softly as she nuzzled his chest. Unable to resist it any longer, he quietly laughed at her behavior, getting another look from Haku as she peeked up at him. Not even thinking about it, he lightly kissed the top of her head while wrapping his arms around her, getting comfortable. While Naruto leaned his head to the side against the couch's backing with his eyes closed, Haku continued staring at him in thought. To anyone else, they must have looked like they'd been a couple for some time, but the truth was that she was just comfortable being around him and he helped make her happy again. Even if the thought had crossed her mind quite a bit recently. As much as she was tempted by it, Haku didn't want to go quite that far with their friendship. Not yet, at least. Then again, with how they'd been acting, they might as well have been romantically involved. It was obvious to her that Naruto had true feelings for her. Maybe not quite love, but if what he'd said back on the bridge was true. "You stole my heart," she would never forget those words. In the midst of a battle and he chooses a time like that to confess his feelings? Then again, in the state he had been in, she couldn't blame him for it. His heart must have really been torn for him to admit that. That was when a frown warped the content smile she'd had, remembering something else he'd said on the bridge. It should be me laying there right now, not him. She knew now that he was too honest for him to not be telling the truth. He honestly wished that he had been the one that was killed. Did that mean he wanted to die? Did he still feel that way? That's when she started to realize a few things. The way he'd reacted when they first met, the trap on his door, the fact he didn't want to talk about why everyone looked at him with hatred, his lack of friends, and having so few precious people in his life. He was so alone, even more so than she'd ever been in her life. The look in his eyes when she asked him about the trap was no different than the look she used to have in her eyes back when Zabuza found her. Her frown worsening as her lips quivered slightly, Haku sat up to look at Naruto fully, unintentionally causing the foxboy to look at her, only to grow concerned for her. "Haku, what's wrong?" he asked worriedly, gently using a furry knuckle to dry a tear that had started to fall from her eye. Wordlessly shaking her head, Haku decided to discard her previous thoughts about them, not giving him a chance to react. Hawk, his eyes went wide with shock, his body going rigid as he was caught off guard. Her soft-skinned hands cupping his face, Naruto slowly let his eyes close as he relaxed, savoring the feeling of Haku's lips on his. His hands hesitantly came to rest on her waist, unintentionally causing Haku to press closer to him until their bodies were flush against one another as she deepened the kiss a little bit. After nearly a full minute, she finally pulled back before using a sleeve to dry her eyes, but it didn't stop them. "I'm sorry for ripping your heart to pieces back then," she whispered, catching him off guard with her words. Before he could try to say anything, she silenced him with a gentle peck on the lips, her teary-eyed smile making Naruto's heart ache. "But you can have mine instead. Okay, Haku," he whispered with a slight stutter, wondering if he'd heard her right. Did she really mean what he thought she meant? Even without voicing such thoughts, Haku could see the silent question in his eyes, smiling a little more as she nodded. Wordlessly pulling her closer, Naruto simply held her as she buried her face against his neck, his eyes a little unfocused as he stared at the far wall in shock. Repositioning her arms so that they were wrapped around his head and neck, Haku began to gently run her fingers through the fur on his head. "You'll never be alone again, Naruto-kun, I promise," she whispered softly, once again catching him off guard. Feeling him tighten his grip on her, Haku shifted her position so that they were both a little more comfortable, straddling him just above his hips as she sat up a little more and cradled his head against her chest. Still running her fingers through the fur on the top and back of his head, Haku simply held him. She hated how it was heartbreak that kept bringing them closer together. As his arms looped around her waist, Haku smiled sadly as she simply held him while his clawed paw-like hands balled up on her back, gripping her turtleneck. He was starting to cry again. "Shush. I'm right here, just like you were for me. It'll be okay, Kitsune-kun. What did you call me?" he whispered, his voice wavering with emotion as tears continued to fall from his eyes. Haku hesitated, thinking she might have made things worse by calling him that. He obviously wasn't proud or pleased with his vulpine appearance. Kitsune-kun, Haku repeated cautiously, only to feel him hold her even tighter as his head shifted from her chest to the side of her neck. That was when she felt him lightly kiss the side of her neck as he breathed in her scent, the butterfly kiss sending a slight shiver up her spine from the unexpected sensation. Glad that he wasn't mad about it, Haku smiled softly once more, content with just holding him. That's when she thought about something else, the bed. That way, they'd be able to get just a little more comfortable because she had a feeling that one of them was fixing to cry themselves to sleep. Hey, you want to go lay down for a little bit? Feeling him nod slightly, Haku slowly climbed off of him before taking his hands in hers and helping him to his feet. When they got to the bedroom, Haku noticed exactly how Spartan his place really was. He had only his bed, a nightstand, and a single dresser in the room, nothing else. There weren't any pictures on any of the walls in the apartment, nothing that could even resemble decorations of any kind, not even lamps. Before he could crawl into bed, Haku stopped him just long enough to take off the holsters holding his trench knives, setting them on the nightstand. Wanting to be a little more comfortable herself, Haku blushed shyly as she shed her baggy pants while Naruto wasn't looking, leaving her cream-skinned legs bare with only her underwear to clothe her lower half. Crawling under the covers with him before he could notice, Haku didn't waste time wrapping her arms back around his head and neck, prompting him to bury his face against her neck with his arms wrapped around her waist. Curling around each other slightly, Haku smiled softly while getting back to gently running her fingers through the fur on his neck, gradually calming him down little by little. Blushing heatedly, however, Haku felt one of Naruto's legs trying to wedge itself between hers, but she knew better than to assume that he was trying to do anything. Letting him get comfortable, Haku slowly moved her leg up higher to drape over his hip, the fox teen pulling her even closer to him until even their stomachs were pressed together. Sweet dreams, my Kitsune-kun, she whispered tenderly into his ear as her cheeks burned bright red from their intimate-looking embrace. Gently kissing the top of his head, Haku smiled warmly when she felt him nuzzle her neck. Ducking and dodging kicks and punches, Naruto used his natural flexibility and agility to his advantage while Sasuke continued trying to land hits on him, his first stage Sharingan active the whole time. While Sasuke was able to somewhat predict where Naruto was going to strike or where he was going to go, the fox teen was still quicker than him, leveling the playing field for them both. Even after a solid 15 minutes of trading blows, neither had managed to land a single solid hit on the other, and it didn't look like either one was going to succeed anytime soon. It had been almost a week since Team 7 had returned from Wave Country, and Kakashi couldn't help noticing the distinct change in his two male students. Neither of them liked talking about what had happened on the bridge that day, but the Junin knew that they'd changed because of it. They didn't clash quite as much anymore, at least not verbally, and their teamwork was at an all-time high, surprisingly. Sasuke, who used to envy Naruto for his speed, was now on relatively equal terms with Naruto in a fight. If he had to label their newfound bond, Kakashi had to say that they were more like brothers now. Speaking of Wave Country, Kakashi mused before glancing over towards his other student, Sakura, as she sparred with Haku. He'd been a little surprised when she had come to one of Team 7's early morning meetings and asked if she could join them during training sessions. Not to actually join their team, but to actually help Kakashi, of all people, with training his students. For the most part, she acted more like an assistant teacher, giving the Junin an extra hand with some things. Such as acting as a sparring partner for Sakura at the moment. Even while they went back and forth, he could see Haku giving the pinkette some pointers on her stance or simple tactics in a fight. The other day, while Naruto and Sasuke had been engaged in another of their fast-paced spars, Haku had asked him for permission to teach Sakura extracurricular skills whenever they weren't busy with team training or missions. Namely, certain medical subjects, how to use Senbon properly, and even herbology. He still hadn't quite made up his mind about it, but Kakashi was slowly growing fond of the idea. It was a shortcoming he was already fully aware of, but he honestly struggled a little when it came to teaching. It was one of the reasons why he had never passed a genin team before Team 7 came around. With Sasuke and Naruto, he had an easier time because they were rather self-sufficient most of the time and only needed guidance on one thing or another to help further their progress. Sakura, on the other hand, was highly intelligent, but still naive to some things and was just now starting to work on her physical skills. Sighing softly, Kakashi reached into the equipment pouch out of habit to pull his Icha novel out, only to pause the moment his fingers brushed against its hardback cover. Shaking his head slightly, he forced himself to leave it be before focusing back on his students and unofficial assistant. He smirked slightly at the last part of his musings. They didn't seem so obvious anymore in public, but Kakashi could tell that the two of them had become much closer than they'd been back in Wave Country. Naruto wasn't acting like an ass most of the time anymore, and the Junin swore he'd seen him smile a couple times during team training, but they only lasted for a split second, leaving the Junin wondering if he'd actually seen him smile or not. Not only that, but Kakashi suspected that Haku had volunteered to help in an effort to needlessly atone for the events on the bridge and keep herself and to stay in shape as well. The ice-wielding girl had even seemed to be far more cheerful than she'd been just a week prior. To be honest, he was actually starting to feel proud of his team. His students were steadily progressing in terms of skills and knowledge while their teamwork was keeping pace. When he'd first taken them on, he had worried that their teamwork would suffer because of their different personalities, and for a while, he was right, but then everything changed when he decided to give them a challenge. That challenge had been the C-rank mission to Wave Country. Ever since, they had all changed. No, not change. They'd matured. That's the word he was looking for. Alright, guys, that's enough for right now. Kakashi suddenly called out to them while reaching into his weapon pouch once more, waving them over with his other hand as he did. The sky was slowly getting a little darker, the blue turning to orange as the afternoon gave way to the evening. Once his three students had come close enough, Kakashi continued, his hand still in the pouch. It's starting to get a little late, so we'll go ahead and stop for the day. Starting tomorrow, though, you all have the next week off, my treat. You guys did good back in Wave Country and you've all been doing good during our team training sessions, so you guys deserve a bit of a break. However, I still want you three to do some studying while you're off. Now, here's your homework. A ninjutsu scroll? Sasuke mumbled quietly, curiously looking through it. He wasn't complaining, but he didn't understand why Kakashi called it homework. Basic anatomy? Sakura questioned as she read the title on her scroll, looking at Kakashi in confusion. Discreetly nodding to Haku as he finally gave her his decision, Kakashi's eyes smiled at his female student and volunteer assistant as Haku smiled slightly, only to start leading Sakura away to explain a few things to her. When he looked at Naruto, the fox boy had already opened his scroll and started wandering off aimlessly. Unlike the other two, Naruto's particular style was rather unique. He had a large amount of chakra for ninjutsu, but his fighting style with his trench knives made it difficult to perform hand seals during combat. Thus, his scroll was half lesson, half instructions. Hey, what's it mean by this? Naruto questioned curiously without looking up from the scroll, having circled back around while Kakashi was distracted with his thoughts. In Naruto's hand was a small piece of paper that was split down the middle at an angle. Elemental chakra nature training. That was his little gift to Naruto. Even as hard as Naruto trained, he didn't expect the boy to figure things out for a while. Still, he was surprised to see what his chakra nature was. That, Naruto, means your chakra has a natural wind affinity. Kakashi explained with an eye smile. It's actually quite rare in Konoha. In fact, there's only one other Junin in Konoha that has that chakra nature. Lucky for you, they also fight with trench knives. Oh, really now? Naruto mumbled as he glanced up at the one-eyed Junin. Idly, Kakashi was glad that Naruto had been coming out of his shell a little more recently. He had been right. Being with Haku had really helped him relax. They were good for each other. What exactly can wind do, though? Well, wind chakra is actually rather versatile compared to the other elements. It can either be focused into powerful gusts of wind or scything blades, but it's a specialized offensive element. Kakashi explained, telling the simple version of what he knew about wind chakra and Futen techniques. I'll try to contact the Junin I mentioned to see if he can help teach you some more about it later on, but for now, I want you to just focus on the beginner lesson for training your wind chakra in the scroll, okay? Hi. Naruto sighed out as he started walking away again, a little irritated that he couldn't learn more at the moment. Watching him leave, Kakashi couldn't resist the slight smile from forming on his face under his mask. In almost 2 months, Naruto had gone from being rather antisocial to being not so antisocial. It was still there, but not quite as much. Thinking of something else, though, Kakashi pondered the bursts of the Kyuubi's chakra he had sensed several times throughout their time in Wave Country. They mostly surfaced during times of combat and they weren't extremely powerful, with the exception of the one time on the bridge, but they happened far too frequently for his liking. It had been one other thing he had left out of his report to the Hokage. While it could become a serious problem later on, Kakashi wasn't going to risk anything happening to the boy. Very few people knew of the boy's parentage, but he did. He wasn't going to risk something bad happening to his late sensei's son and legacy. Mind wandering a little as he thought of his late sensei, Kakashi shivered a little bit, imagining Naruto using his father's most infamous technique. He's already one hell of a speed demon in a fight. If he learned that, there'd be no stopping him. He'd be even scarier if he used Asuma's Hien fighting style with it. Kakashi mused before shaking his head and clearing his mind. He was looking too far into the future. Besides, there was no guarantee he'd even learn about the Hiraishin, let alone if he'd be able to use it or not. Reaching back into his pouch, Kakashi fingered a sealing scroll he always carried with him, once again weighing the pros and cons of training with the weapon he had recently added to his arsenal. Deciding to find a more secluded training ground where he wouldn't be disturbed, Kakashi started walking. Days gave way to weeks as Team 7 went about their normal activities of training or missions. Already, 2 months had passed since she had come to Konoha, and Haku couldn't be happier. Thankful that her new turtleneck was longer in the body and a little stretchy, Haku tugged it down until it reached halfway down her thighs, turning it into a makeshift skirt as she walked into the kitchen, her lower half barren of any leggings or pants, a habit she had developed after her first day living with Naruto. Humming quietly to herself as she started getting everything ready to make breakfast, Haku couldn't help smiling. 2 months. They'd been together for 2 months already. Her nightmares had died off, only acting up every once in a while, and Naruto had opened up to her quite a bit recently. While it still bothered her, she now knew why everyone glared at him. The Kyuubi attacked the village on the night of his birth, and because of something a madman had done to Naruto when he was younger, his fox-like appearance had made him a target of hate for the civilians of the village. Granted, a portion of Konoha's ninja hated him as well, but they never took action against him. He had finally cracked and told her about it after a rather nasty encounter she'd had with a group of drunken civilians one evening while walking back to the apartment from visiting Sakura. They weren't a threat to her, but they had quite a lot to say about her and Naruto. None of it was kind. One of them had tried getting handsy, but he quickly learned not to ever touch her again. Scared of her, they ran and had the nerve to try getting her in trouble the next day. Thankfully, the matter was resolved and the drunks charged with harassment, the handsy one having been charged with attempted molestation. Naruto had been furious, to say the least, but she'd managed to calm him down and keep him from doing anything stupid. Shaking her head and clearing it of such negative thoughts, Haku went back to making breakfast, humming once more as she started cracking some eggs and scrambling them. Her time in Konoha had been relatively peaceful and she was glad for it. She had been growing weary of always running, of always hiding. She didn't regret any of it, but she was glad that there had been good things to come from Zabuza's passing, no matter much it had hurt her. Naruto had been helping her acquire books and scrolls from the shinobi library to better refine some of her skills that helped strengthen what she already knew and even add a few new things to her repertoire of techniques and talents. Naruto himself had been working hard to better himself, even if he was still struggling with the leaf-cutting exercise. Because of her bloodline, which automatically mixed water and wind chakra to create her ice techniques, Haku hadn't needed to learn how to form solely wind chakra, keeping her from being able to help him with it. He had still been working on other things. He'd gotten much faster as he started thinking up new tricks to enhance his speed and had started working on increasing his physical strength. They usually had a weekly spar to keep their skills sharp at all times, and Haku had to admit that if he was as skilled as he was now when they'd first fought, he would have most likely beat her. Still humming softly with a smile on her face, Haku had just finished cooking everything when she felt a pair of arms wrap around her waist from behind. Giggling happily as she leaned against their owner, Haku couldn't help the blush from forming on her cheeks as Naruto lightly nibbled on her ear playfully. He always did that every morning when he woke up, whether she was in the kitchen getting breakfast ready or she was still in bed with him on the rare lazy day when they decided to sleep in a little while. Hee. Good morning, Kitsune-kun. Haku greeted warmly as she turned around in his arms, noticing how Naruto hadn't even opened his eyes yet, something that made her giggle again. He tended to use his memory of his apartment's layout, his hearing, and his sense of smell to guide him in the mornings whenever she was cooking breakfast. He never was much of a morning person. Did you sleep well? Morning, Haku-chan. Naruto mumbled tiredly before lightly nudging her cheek with his nose, only to gently kiss her on the lips. Wrapping her arms around his neck and shoulders, Haku deepened the kiss, her lips parting to give his tongue access to her mouth as he pulled her closer to him. Moaning softly, Haku lightly ran her fingers through his fur before giggling a little and playfully slapping him on the back of his head when she felt his hand squeeze her butt, the sleepy fox-like teen whining as she broke the kiss. "Ah, come on. I was enjoying that. And your breakfast is getting cold because of it." Haku, still pantless, teased as she broke free of his arms with some reluctance before pushing him in the direction of the dining table. "Now, go sit down while I finish up." "Meh, you're no fun." He grumbled half-heartedly while shuffling over to the table to sit down as he'd been told. Gently biting her bottom lip with a shy smile as she portioned everything out onto a pair of plates, Haku couldn't help blushing as she thought about how intimate they'd become recently. While they hadn't had, they most certainly enjoyed a healthy amount of heavy petting, and Naruto wasn't to blame for it, she was. Suppressing a quiet giggle as she recalled the first time she'd actually encouraged him to let his hands wander while they'd been making out, Haku realized just how innocent he really was. She thought he was going to have a heart attack that day when she moved his hands to her chest. Also because of her, it didn't take him long to shed that innocence. "Here you go, eat up," Haku instructed as she set the plate in front of him with a kiss on the top of his head, a simple and loving morning ritual she had that always got him to open his eyes. Yawning tiredly, Naruto finally opened his eyes, if only slightly, before starting to eat. Sitting down across from him, Haku started eating as well, her cheeks still warm with a slight blush. She still couldn't believe she was 2 years older than him. Despite his younger age showing during little moments when they were alone together, Haku had always found him to be rather mature for his age. He definitely didn't act like he was 16, but she was glad that he still did every once in a while. Hearing a quiet mewl from Ren, Haku watched what had become a common occurrence. Eyes having closed again as he ate, Naruto's ear twitched slightly as Ren silently jumped up on top of the table. Sluggishly swatting at the cat, Naruto tried shooing Ren off the table, only for the sneaky cat to snag one of the sausage patties off his plate without him noticing. Giggling at the pair as Ren took off with his prize, Haku took another bite of her meal. He did his best to ignore the poison in everyone's eyes as he walked down the road, his scarf tugged up over his nose and his hands stuffed in his pockets. He did his best to ignore the hateful whispers and mutterings, his ears pinned back. It was the same shit every single day, people calling him a demon or monster or freak. It infuriated him to no end, but didn't do anything about it out of fear of someone trying to start trouble just to get him executed. It had happened 3 times before and he very nearly lost his life on the 3rd attempt. That's why, as an empty sake bottle smashed against the back of his head, Naruto did his best to ignore it. That's why he did his best to ignore the blood trickling down the back of his neck, soaking his fur. He didn't break stride. He didn't so much as look to see what his assailant looked like. He just kept walking. When his ears caught the sound of a second bottle, however, he waited until the last second before leaning his head to the side, catching it with one hand. Even still, he just kept walking, depositing the empty bottle in a trash can as he passed by it. Most people would have snapped a long time ago and either killed themselves or tried to kill everyone else by now if they had to live even a week in his shoes. Well, metaphorically speaking, the reasons why he hadn't done either of those yet was simple. As much as they hated him, he still loved his village, so he would never kill them. Not all of them, at least. Maybe just the worst of them, his most avid haters. No, he couldn't even really do that. He couldn't even bring himself to seriously harm any of them. As for killing himself, he was too stubborn to just kill himself. He believed suicide to be the coward's way out and he was by no means a coward. Wanting to die, though? 6 months ago, he would have still fought to the bitter end, but yeah, he wanted to die back then. Now, though, he finally had a reason to keep on going. Finally reaching his apartment building, Naruto paused for a second and craned his neck to look up at the top balcony where his apartment was located. Smiling slightly beneath his scarf, Naruto trudged onto the stairs, his tail slowly flicking from side to side behind him. As badly as he wanted to escape the hatred and hide himself in Haku's embrace, Naruto took his time walking up the 6 flights of stairs. He had to give his healing factor time to stitch the back of his head up, not wanting Haku to notice the injury. She might know the official reason for their animosity towards him, but the last thing he needed was for her to find out about the real reason as to why everyone hated him, his burden. He was scared of losing her because of it. An irrational fear, of course, but it was still a fear that had a strong grip on him. Cleaning away the small bit of blood that matted the fur on the back of his head and neck just as he reached the top floor, Naruto fished his keys out of his pocket as he neared the door to their apartment. Unlocking the door and double-checking to make sure the booby trap was still inactive, Naruto went inside and shut the door behind him, relocking it. Hanging his equipment and scarf on the wall, Naruto walked towards the bedroom since he hadn't seen her in the den or kitchen, but just as he neared the hallway, he heard the telltale sound of the shower running. As he focused his hearing on the bathroom, however, he heard Haku humming to herself in the shower. Smiling at the sound, Naruto continued to the room to get a little more comfortable, depositing his trench knives on the nightstand. He took his time unraveling the cloth wrappings on his forelegs, lightly scratching at the slight scab left behind by the healed cut as it itched a little. Bundling up the twin obsidian fabric strips and tossing them into the laundry bin across the room so that they could be cleaned later, Naruto pulled his gloves and mesh shirt off as well, ruffling his fur a little bit in the process before they followed after the wrappings. Taking off his belt and running his thumb over the stylized leaf engraved on the plate, Naruto smiled slightly, remembering how he got it. It had been the same night he learned of his burden and had learned how to perform the cage bunchin technique. "Oh, hey, when do you get back?" Haku greeted as she walked into the room wearing a pair of dark blue shorts that stopped halfway down her thighs and a light gray form-fitting tank top, still drying her hair with a towel. "Just a few minutes ago," he answered tiredly as she walked over to him, their lips meeting in a tender but short-lived kiss. Immediately noticing his mood, however, Haku looked at him worriedly before crouching down in front of him, looking him in the eye as she put a hand on his. "Hey, you okay?" she asked softly, frowning slightly. Smiling weakly, he kissed her on the forehead. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a long day," he mumbled softly, but it did little to reassure her. Taking his Hite 8 from him and setting it on the nightstand, Haku dropped her towel on the ground before gently pushing him down so that he was laying on his back. Climbing onto his lap and straddling him, Haku laid down on top of him to keep him from going anywhere, running a hand over his head and along one of his long fox-like ears. "You've only been gone for a few hours. Seriously, it's not even lunchtime yet," she whispered worriedly, looking him in the eye as he slowly relaxed beneath her, his hands resting on her hips. "What happened, baby?" Naruto was quiet as he turned his head to the side to stare at the wall. Grimacing slightly, Haku sighed softly before kissing him on the cheek, still petting his ears slightly. She'd learned that it soothed him whenever she first did it about a month ago. They stayed like that for a couple minutes in silence before he sighed, closing his eyes. "I just don't know what to do anymore. No matter what I do, they flat out refuse to let go of their hatred. I'm sorry, Naruto. I wish I could do something to help." Haku mumbled softly, frowning as she tilted his head back towards her and kissed him on the lips again. Naruto smiled weakly again as he looked up at her, lightly dragging a finger along the side of her face, tucking a strand of her raven black hair behind an ear. "You do more than enough, Haku," he whispered before pulling her closer, kissing her lovingly for a few moments. "You give me a reason to come home every day. You're such a hopeless romantic. You know that, right?" Haku responded light-heartedly before gently kissing him again. "Don't worry, they'll come around eventually. I've been telling myself that for years, Haku. They never do and they never will." He sighed out as he closed his eyes and simply held her, burying his nose in her damp hair. She'd switched shampoos again. She smelled of lilac and lavender now. They sat like that in silence once more for a few minutes before Naruto decided to change the subject. "Scarecrow nominated us for the Chunin Exams today." "Oh, really? I heard it can be pretty hard." Haku intoned, taking the hint to let the subject drop. "Do you know where it's being held this year?" "Here in Konoha," he mumbled as Haku gently kissed the side of his neck just an inch or so below his ear. "They start next month." Don't worry, baby. You got this." Haku encouraged with a smile, taking one of his hands into her own, interlocking fingers with him as she relaxed on top of him. If you can beat me, I have no doubt in my mind that you can beat them, too. HMPH. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Naruto grumbled sourly, getting a pouting glare from Haku. I haven't actually beaten you yet, and the fight on the bridge doesn't count. And why the hell not? Haku questioned a little heatedly, but her anger was hollow. She was just upset that he wasn't taking her compliment. Because I had an unfair advantage. He countered, getting an unconvinced look from Haku as she sat up a little. That was when he realized his minor slip-up. His good mood soured once more as he looked away from her. Feeling her gaze on him still, he knew she wasn't going to let up this time. Closing his eyes, he felt like smacking the shit out of himself. Fuck, you mean that strange reddish chakra you used, don't you? Haku questioned suspiciously, her eyes narrowing slightly as she sat up fully in his lap. When he didn't move or even acknowledge that he'd heard her, Haku started getting a little upset with him. Naruto, talk. I don't want to. He whispered softly, and despite the obvious notes of fear she heard in his voice, Haku wasn't going to give in so easily this time. Still, he was scared for a reason, and she was going to find out why. 6 months, Naruto. That's how long we've been together. Haku whispered softly as she laid back down, resting her head on his chest with their hands still clasped together. Giving his hand a reassuring squeeze, Haku closed her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. I promised you that you would never be alone again, and I meant it. So, please, just tell me, baby. They don't hate me just because of how I look, Haku. He mumbled quietly, squeezing Haku's hand a little tighter. It was time for him to bite the blade, it seemed, and there was nothing he could do to avoid it. Haku only got honestly upset when she was serious about something. Once that happened, she wouldn't let up until she fixed the issue or found a way to settle things. The night I was born, the Yondaime Hokage was forced to seal the Kyuubi no Kitsune inside of me to protect the village. That's why they all hate me, believing me to be the Kyuubi reborn. Was that all it was? Haku whispered softly, surprising Naruto as she pulled her hand away from his and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding his head against her chest comfortingly. They sat in silence for a second before she explained, hearing his unspoken question loud and clear. The Yondaime Mizukage back in Kiri had been a demon container himself, Naruto. I may not know much about them, but I know what they are. You are not the Kyuubi, no matter what anyone may think or say. No matter what you look like. And to be honest, I've had my suspicions about it since the fight on the bridge. I just never brought it up, just in case I was wrong. Don't be scared, Naruto. I love you more than anything else in this world, and nothing is ever going to change that. I'm not going anywhere. Naruto stayed silent as he wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her tight as she kissed the top of his head, stroking one of his ears again. Whereas in the past, he would have been crying out of sheer relief by that point, Naruto found himself only able to smile as he held the young woman. She was too good for him. Of that, he was certain. Reaching up to cup her cheek, Naruto waited until she moved so that they were eye level again before pulling her in for a loving kiss, pouring all of his gratitude and love for her into it. Closing her eyes as she felt him relax underneath her, Haku reciprocated the emotional and passionate kiss, reassuring her, Kitsune-kun, of her heartfelt feelings for him. Finally breaking apart for air a minute later, they simply stared into each other's eyes for a few moments. Cheeks flushed and left a little breathless from the passionate lip lock, Haku smiled a little bit, a smile Naruto recognized all too well. She was getting excited. Leaning back down and capturing his lips in another kiss, this time forcing her tongue into his mouth, Haku couldn't resist pressing her hips against his, purposefully trying to rile him up as she slowly rocked her hips back and forth. Breaking the kiss after a little bit, Naruto didn't hesitate to latch onto the side of her neck, earning him a throaty moan as he started sucking on her flesh. Nuru. Haku moaned out weakly, fisting her hand in the fur on the back of his neck with one hand while the other gripped the hem of his pants at his hip. Slowly rolling them over to reverse their positions, Haku tilted her head back to give him better access to her throat while locking her ankles behind his waist just above the base of his tail. She could only grind her hips against his more frantically as she felt his hand move to her rear, groping just a tad roughly. A quiet whimpering moan escaped her before she forcefully detached him from her neck, capturing his lips in a heated kiss, her hand still fisted in his fur while her other hand dragged her nails down his back. Playfully growling at him as she pulled back, His bottom lip caught in her teeth. Haku grinned a little seductively as she started grinding against him slower and more tortuously. Hearing his own growl rumbling in his throat and chest, Haku only got even more excited, forcing her tongue into his mouth once more. She was going to enjoy pushing him to the brink time and time again, already planning to finally give him what he deserved on his upcoming birthday in a couple months. Until then, she was going to have fun relentlessly teasing him whenever she got the chance. Kaden. Hosenka. Sasuke declared while expelling a dozen or so fist-sized fireballs in rapid succession as Naruto charged him, trench knives drawn. Ducking and weaving between them without slowing down, Naruto rushed the Uchiha as he backpedaled as fast as he could. Unfortunately, Sasuke had lost track of his surroundings amongst the chaos for a moment and found himself backed up against a tree. In the blink of an eye, Naruto was in front of him, the blade of his knife lightly pressed against his neck as he came to a full stop. And that concludes today's final match. Kakashi spoke up as he landed nearby, the two separating while staring each other in the eye. It was the first time Naruto had managed to beat Sasuke in an unrestricted spar, and he had to admit that he was impressed with Naruto's speed and tenacity. He waited a moment as he watched Naruto sheathe his blades before extending a fist toward Sasuke. Looking away, Sasuke begrudgingly bumped his fist against Naruto's. It had become a little quirk of theirs whenever they would finish a spar. They were definitely like brothers. Alright, guys, I'm going to cut today's training session short. Be sure to get plenty of rest, the Chunin Exams start tomorrow. Dismissed. Just so you know, Sasuke, if I'd been anyone else, I wouldn't have been able to beat you so quick. Naruto remarked as he started walking, idly rubbing at his left bicep where a fireball had come close enough to hitting him that singed a few of his hairs. Whatever it is you've been doing, keep it up and I might not be able to beat you again. See you tomorrow, man. Yeah, Sasuke mumbled out as he watched the foxboy walk away. He was an enigma. For so long, they'd been at each other's throats, and then the events in Wave Country changed all of that. Neither Naruto nor Haku told him about what had transpired after he went down, but whatever it was, it drastically changed Naruto. He had started acting almost nice to him at first, and while it was a somewhat welcome change, Sasuke still hadn't been able to figure out why. Eventually, it became infectious and he started returning the respect he was shown. Over the past 6 months, it had developed into a mutual rivalry between them, and Sasuke honestly didn't know how to take it. Dismissing those thoughts for now, he turned and started walking away, intending to head home for a little more training to finish off the day. Plucking a leaf from a low-hanging branch as he started walking back to his apartment, Naruto put it between his hands and started concentrating, focusing his chakra just right. After a few seconds, he opened his hands to reveal that the leaf had been cut, but only halfway. Sighing, he let the leaf fall from his hand as he continued his journey. Oh, well, progress was still progress. Ah, I missed the spar. Haku whined as she dropped down and fell in step with him. I knew I should have wrapped things up with Sakura a little sooner. Don't worry, depending on how things go in the exams, you might see me and Sasuke actually go at it. Naruto reassured with a smirk, honestly excited to have a match with the two of them going all out against each other. How's she doing in her studies, anyways? Well, she's about as accurate with Senbon as I was when we first met. She's got the basics of anatomy and herbology down, but she's still learning how to make medicine out of the herbs she knows about. Haku answered thoughtfully, her hands clasped behind her back. Still, she's gotten better with her taijutsu. A lot better. Almost scarily so. I'm just taking a shot in the dark here, but I'm pretty sure she's got an earth affinity. It would definitely explain that freakish strength of hers. That's good. I'd hate for me and Sasuke to be the only ones getting stronger after all this time. Naruto admitted before glancing over at Haku. You sure you don't want me to talk to the old man about trying to get you into the ranks? You'd make one hell of a sensei. Shush. Haku mumbled, blushing slightly at the praise, thankful for her new chosen outfit helping to hide her embarrassment. She had taken to wearing a pair of black form-fitting 3/4 length pants, a black form-fitting top with mesh short sleeves, a baggy dark midnight blue nose-high collared top with baggy sleeves that cut off at her fingertips and light gray trim along the edges and cuffs, and a light gray sash wrapped around her waist with one end left to hand down to her knees in the front. Like usual, she kept a set of 3 senbon holsters strapped to either of her thighs, an equipment pouch situated behind either of her hips, and a larger one situated between them that usually held her medical supplies. She had even acquired a new mask, but she rarely wore it. Seriously, you would. I'm pretty sure if we'd talked to him and explained everything, you could become a Chunin without much of an issue. Naruto continued, only making Haku's blush worsen. They could use someone like you there. It'd be good work. Keep it up. I dare you. Haku mumbled threateningly, prodding him in the side with a senbon. Yelping slightly as he flinched away, Naruto half-heartedly glared at her while rubbing his side where she poked him. Spoil sport, he grumbled while tugging his scarf up over his nose. Exiting the training ground near the edge of town, Naruto led her down a lesser-used path to avoid the hatred of the villagers. Smiling as she slipped under his arm and leaned her head against his chest and shoulder, Naruto wrapped his arm around her waist. So, what should we do to spend our afternoon now that we've got some free time? I heard there's a new couple's onsen not too far from here. Haku, innocently, suggested. Giving her a flat stare as his cheeks warmed, Naruto simply sighed and shook his head as she grinned at him sheepishly. She'd been acting a little feisty recently. Can't say I didn't try. I was thinking more along the lines of something that didn't involve me smelling like wet dog. He grumbled irritably while Haku groaned quietly in complaint. He had a point though. For some reason, anytime he visited the hot springs with her, he always wound up smelling like wet dog by the time they left. While she found it kind of funny, he obviously didn't. Then again, his sense of smell was much stronger than hers. Before either of them could continue, a couple kids laughing and playing ran by, obviously playing ninja with each other as they scurried off, something that brought a warm smile to Haku's lips as she nuzzled his shoulder lovingly. Don't even think about it. Maybe in the future, but I don't do kids. Oh, shut up. I can dream, can't I? Haku grumbled with a pout, her cheeks flushed heatedly. Their conversation was cut short, however, when they heard one of the kids cry out in pain as they rounded a corner just up ahead. Immediately releasing one another, they rushed ahead just to make sure the kid was okay, only to find him held up in the air by his scarf by an unfamiliar face. Haku was already readying a handful of senbon from within the confines of her sleeve while Naruto advanced ahead of her. Put the kid down, Suna-nin, Naruto warned as he flexed his claws. Wearing an all-black cat-eared onesie, the face-painted Suna shinobi turned to look at him, but didn't let go of the kid. Even still, Naruto kept advancing while drawing his trench knives. Last warning. Hey, looks like the freaks are coming out of the woodwork. Kankuro taunted as he eyed the fox boy, using his free hand to connect a chakra string to his foot as he took another step, intending to trip him up. However, he misjudged Naruto's balance. As his foot was forcefully moved, Naruto's eyes widened slightly in surprise before his tail and reflexes kicked in, causing him to use it to his advantage. Spinning on his other foot, Naruto added chakra to the greave on his other leg, the twin crimson claw blades extending instantly as his foot became level with the Suna-genin's neck. Freezing as the blade tips lightly pressed against his throat, Kankuro held his free hand up in submission while setting the kid down, who scurried off to his friends as they hid behind Haku. Alright, no need to get hostile. Keep your hands to yourself while you're here, Suna-nin. Anything done outside of the exams can be seen as a crime. Naruto cautioned as he retracted his blades and lowered his leg back down. And for your information, that kid just so happens to be the Hokage's grandson. Touch him again and I'll personally see to your punishment. TCH. Cocky little shit, aren't you? Kankuro growled, half tempted to pick a fight with him before remembering his warning. It was true. Any fighting outside of the Chunin exams would immediately disqualify all parties involved, and that was before they'd be punished by their respective villages. He'd heard of people getting punished with things as simple as a 2-week suspension to being executed for their actions. He wasn't so willing to push his luck. Plus, his little brother would probably kill him if he got them kicked out of the exams. You win this time, Fox, but you better watch your back later. I'll be waiting, puppeteer. Naruto growled back in response, surprising Kankuro a little bit, having already figured out what he'd done to throw him off balance. Waiting until the puppeteer and the fan-toting blonde with him left the area, Naruto sheathed his trench knives with a growling huff. Thanks for the save, Kitsune Oni-san. The Hokage's grandson, Konohamaru, called out before he and his two friends ran off once more, being a little more careful as they booked it around a corner. Eyebrow twitching slightly at his new apparent nickname, Naruto sighed heavily while Haku slipped back under his arm, retaking her old position with a teasing grin. "You don't do kids, huh?" she teased, getting a half-hearted glare from her boyfriend in return. It only made her laugh, and for him to growl irritably, she wasn't going to let it go now. Still, he found himself even more excited about the Chunin exams now. There were sure to be some strong opponents to fight, and he always did love a challenge. The next day, Naruto waited for his teammates to show up from under the shade of a tree that was near the entrance for the academy grounds, his arms crossed over his chest and scarf pulled up over his nose. He'd seen a good number of potential threats amongst the foreign shinobi that plagued the area like a swarm of locusts, but that was about it. Half of the crowd seemed more like fodder to him. Hopefully, the exams would weed them out before he got to them. He didn't like hollow victories. "Ready to go?" Sasuke suddenly spoke up as he and Sakura drew closer, getting a snort from the fox boy in confirmation without him looking at them. Without wasting another second, Naruto shoved off the tree and started heading inside with his team, fully prepared for the challenges to come. He could feel it bubbling beneath the surface, anxious to break free and run rampant. Pupils contracting into razor blades, Naruto watched everyone around him with narrowed eyes, leaning back against the wall just off to the side of the others with his thumbs hooked on the holsters to his trench knives. Bloodlust was heavy in the air and it was causing some unwanted side effects. Just like in Wave Country, he could feel the beginnings of a chakra spike in his body, his nerves set on a hair trigger. After experiencing them so much back then, he'd grown somewhat accustomed to how they felt, letting him know when one was starting to form. Listening for any nearby threats, Naruto let his mind wander a little bit. The chakra spikes had stopped after the fight on the bridge and hadn't happened since. So why now? Could his stress level be a trigger? Or could it be his latent battle lust? His stress level was ruled out almost instantly. Just being in the village stressed him out. He never knew when he'd be attacked or provoked by the villagers, leaving him slightly paranoid despite his inaction against them. It had to be his battle lust, something he'd developed after that pale-skinned freak fucked with his DNA. He'd been 5 when he'd been taken prisoner, and now, 11 years later, what had originally just a somewhat violent short temper had turned into something a little worse. But he could control it to a degree. He couldn't summon it on command, but it always came at the most crucial of times. Even though it seemed to activate at random, Naruto had figured it out. It wasn't random. He could only deduce that it was the Kyuubi's doing, amplifying him with its chakra whenever he was in a fight with shinobi stronger than him, almost as if it could sense and gauge their level of power. The only chakra spike that hadn't followed those same rules had been the one that happened when he was fighting Haku. That time, he'd triggered it himself, so it definitely had a secondary trigger tied into his emotions, but it wasn't as controlled. If it's already starting to act up, that means there are some pretty strong opponents here. Naruto mused with a slight frown, his eyes scanning the crowded room. I'll have to be careful. If it spikes during a fight, I'll know to fight them seriously, but I'm not taking any chances. Be smart about this, Naruto. Conserve your chakra whenever possible and don't waste your energy on pointless things. How about Uzumaki Naruto? He heard someone inquire, their tone edged with aggression. Eyes locking onto the source, he saw Inuzuka Kiba glaring at him as he conversed with a strangely familiar-smelling teen with silver hair and glasses. The bloodlust and mingling myriad of scents made it difficult to pinpoint it specifically, but Naruto had a gut feeling that he knew the weird boy. Pushing off the wall and approaching the group, Naruto kept his eyes locked on the canine-like teen. They'd always been at odds since he first joined the academy. Like most of his other haters, Kiba had had a grudge against him for the past 9 years because of his fox-like appearance and scent. Let's see. Uzumaki Naruto, member of Team 7 under Hitaki Kakashi. Kabuto began, looking over the Nin info card in his hand. Mission history. 8 D ranks and 1 C rank. His taijutsu is high, but not much is known about his skills in ninjutsu and genjutsu, although he does favor the cage bunshin technique on occasion. He's extremely skilled with kunai and a pair of trench knives he uses. There's a note here saying that he'd been kidnapped as a child and experimented on by That's enough of that. Naruto snarled, a kunai piercing the card on him and ripping it out of Kabuto's hand, staking it to the ground. A second later, the card was engulfed in a puff of smoke, the information destroyed. Kabuto narrowed his eyes ever so slightly at it. The only way to destroy the information was for chakra other than his own to go through it, precaution he'd added to them. That meant Naruto had put chakra into his kunai when he threw it, but why? Did he know? Did he recognize him? There are some things that shouldn't be dug up. Speaking of which, Kabuto wasn't able to react in time before Naruto wrapped a hand around the older teen's throat, lifting him off the ground until his feet were no longer touching the floor. Kabuto gripped Naruto's wrist as he glared down at the boy, only to notice the burning red eyes glaring back at him. Lightly pressing the tip of another kunai against Kabuto's cheek, Naruto narrowed his eyes even more with a snarl. "How did you come across that information?" He growled quietly, ignoring the startled looks from his old classmates. That had been highly classified by the Hokage 10 years ago. "So, how?" "Stand down, Uzumaki." Someone suddenly roared from the front of the room, appearing in a large cloud of smoke as nearly 24 Konoha shinobi appeared via Shunshin simultaneously. Naruto glared at the speaker out of the corner of his eye as they shifted back to blue, his ears pinned back. But he reluctantly let Kabuto stand on his own and retracted his kunai. Standing at the front of the group was a man many feared, Morino Ibiki, head of Konoha's torture and interrogation department. "Keep it up and you'll be disqualified. Whatever you say, Scarface." Naruto snarled quietly as he stepped away from Kabuto, sheathing the two kunai he'd drawn. His clawed fingers flexed as he itched to draw his trench knives, wanting to know where Kabuto had learned about his past and why he seemed so insufferably familiar. Other than that, he did his best to ignore some of the looks his old classmates were giving him, most of them already biased against him like Kiba. And most of the village. However, he could still sense a couple of them second-guessing their opinions of him as they drew up their own conclusions about his past. "Alright, listen up, all of you. From this point on, there will be no fighting without the permission of the examiner. Even if permission is granted, killing your opponent will not be tolerated." Ibiki informed, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear him just fine. "The swine that disobey me will be failed immediately. Am I understood?" After a few seconds of silence, Ibiki smirked sadistically, unnerving a couple of the less experienced genin present. "Good. We will now start the first test of the Chunin Exams. Instead of your current seating arrangements, you will be collecting one of these numbered tabs." Ibiki instructed, holding up one such tab to his audience. "And sit in the seat assigned to you. After everyone is seated, we will then hand out the exams." A paper test. Naruto thought irritably with a quiet growl. "Just fucking wonderful. It sure is boring without my team." Kakashi sighed out as he leaned back into the couch, an arm draped over the edge as he stared up at the ceiling with a half-lidded eye. Ashing his cigarette, Asuma chuckled slightly at the man's complaint. "Don't worry, Kakashi. You'll be busy again soon." The Sarutobi reassured with a smirk. "I heard that the examiner for the first test is Morino Ibiki." Kakashi grunted out quietly without taking his eyes off the ceiling, confusing Asuma and Kurenai as they waited in the Junan Lounge. "That sadist might scare the hell out of the others, but my team will be fine." "They doesn't scare so easy." "Sadist?" Kurenai parroted curiously. "The man's a pro," Asuma answered as he took a drag of his death stick. "A pro?" She repriated once more, looking at Asuma with a slightly narrowed gaze. She was a little irritated by the useless answer. "A pro of what?" "Torture and interrogation." Asuma responded with a smirk, startling Kurenai slightly as she worried for her team. "To the 78 who remain," Ibiki began, raising his voice simply to instill just a tad bit more fear into the genin in front of him for his personal enjoyment before smirking. "Congratulations on passing the first test." "Wait, what do you mean? We already pass?" Sakura was the first to speak up, most of the people in the room shocked and confused by the revelation. "What about the 10th question?" Leaning back in his chair, Naruto kept his arms crossed over his chest, scarf pulled up and ears perpetually pinned back as he narrowed his eyes at the man. He'd struggled through half of the test, managing to answer a couple on his own without too much of an issue before being forced into cheating for the rest, which hadn't been easy. His hearing was good, But he had to focus hard to properly time the sound of someone's pencil with their strokes to essentially guesstimate what they were writing. Even still, half of the answers he acquired that way turned out to be just gibberish from his mistakes, leaving his test incomplete. Luckily, he managed to call the man's bluff by betting everything on the 10th question. There was never a 10th question. Ibiki answered with a grin that uneased a few people, even a couple of the proctors assisting him. Ibiki was not a man known for having a nice or friendly smile. Or rather, you could say that the two choices you had to make were the 10th question. What? Then what were the first 9 questions were for? Demanded the blonde fan-wielding girl he'd seen with the Suna puppeteer yesterday. Even before Ibiki answered, Naruto figured it out, closing his eyes for a moment, information gathering. They were pointless then, but they weren't. They had already served their intended purpose. Ibiki answered somewhat casually, further confusing most of the genin present. That was when he gained a rather sadistic look in his eyes, his grin shifting to a more purposefully frightening look. They were to test your individual information gathering skills. That was their purpose. Tuning out the man's explanation, Naruto felt the beginnings of another chakra spike coming on, but managed to suppress it with some effort. They were getting more frequent. Why, though? He wasn't in combat, he wasn't getting stressed by anything, and while there were still strong potential opponents around him, there was no bloodlust in the air at the moment. Idly wishing he could actually speak with the Kyuubi at the moment, Naruto figured he'd be able to get answers from the beast itself, but it wasn't to be. He couldn't establish contact through meditation, the only method he had figured would work. So, how would he manage it? Was he stuck trying to solve the mystery of the chakra spikes by himself? Not exactly a foreign concept for him, Naruto grimaced slightly regardless. As much as he liked a challenge, the chakra spikes were a challenge outside of his capabilities. He'd already discarded the theory of them being the Kyuubi attempting to break free. The Sandaime had explained to him a long time ago that the seal had been put into place by the Shinigami itself by the Yondaime and was designed to bind their souls together. If he died, so would the Kyuubi, and if the fox tried forcing its way out, it would kill him in the process, thus ending both of their lives. Even if the fox would just reform after a few years. At that point, was it trying to do something to him? If so, what? Apart from spikes in his aggression, chakra, strength, and speed, he hadn't noticed anything different. It was starting to grate on his nerves. Scratching at his head slightly out of irritation, Naruto decided to think about it later when he wasn't busy. You have all made it through the entrance. The first test of the Chunin selection exam is now over. Ibiki stated with a touch of pride on his face. I wish you guys luck. Faye. Nice speech, Scarface. Did you need help writing it? Naruto grumbled sarcastically, ignoring the fact that he hadn't even listened to any of it. Eyeing him, Ibiki smirked slightly. While the other proctors hadn't noticed the boy when he was cheating, Ibiki had. With only his hearing to aid him, he managed rather decently. Despite having never met before, Ibiki had been one of the very few shinobi in Konoha that kept close tabs on the boy. Originally, it had been a precaution, just in case the boy's loyalty had shifted over to Orochimaru's side when he'd been rescued. As time went by and his name had been cleared, Ibiki had taken a minor interest in the foxboy. While his academy grades had suffered, Naruto was far more intelligent than many gave him credit for. Keeping tabs on the kid had proven worthwhile. It had shed light on the corruption taking place in the academy, corruption within the civilian council, and even in certain parts of the Anbu. Most of it had been tied to misplaced hatred towards him, but some of those that had been brought to him were proven to have committed treason in various ways. Before anything else could be said or done, a dark bundle suddenly crashed through one of the windows, only to unfurl and reveal itself to be a banner staked to the ceiling with a pair of kunai, a woman standing in front of it. As she made her entrance, Ibiki frowned tiredly from behind the banner. His second in command was a very strange individual. This is no time to be celebrating, brats. I am the examiner for the second test. She shouted. Mitarashi Anko. Now, let's go. Follow me. You have poor timing. Ibiki grumbled as he stepped around the banner, but his remark went unheard by the purple-haired woman as she quickly counted the remaining genin in the room. 78? You let 26 teams pass? Anko growled out at Ibiki. The test was too easy this time. No, there just happened to more outstanding candidates this year. Ibiki corrected with a slight smirk, but once more, it did nothing to change Anko's attitude. Bah, whatever, Anko muttered. I'll be sure to cut them in half in the second test. Must you always yell? Naruto growled at her, picking at one of his ears in an effort to ease the discomfort. There's no need to shout all the time. Oh, did I hurt your ears, pup? Anko asked tauntingly, only making Naruto's eyes narrow, the fox boy oblivious to how they flashed red for a split second. It only made Anko grin rather viciously. Ah, I'm getting excited. I'll explain everything once we change locations. Follow me, Faye. Naruto scoffed as the woman jumped back out the window before standing up himself to follow after her. Fucking psycho lady. Minutes later, once the room had been cleared, Ibiki was gathering up the test sheets when he ran across Naruto's. Half of the answers were filed in correctly, while the other half was left blank. However, scribbled in a corner of the page was a clawed paw-like hand, giving the middle finger. Sighing heavily, Ibiki added it to the stack he had. So, that's what a futon technique can do. Naruto growled out quietly as he got back to his feet, having been thrown a so far unknown distance by a powerful gust of wind. First, they get attacked by that aimed genin that tried waiting to ambush one of them before he tracked him down and chased him off. Now this? Catching wind of the distinct stench of snake, Naruto glared off to the side to find the largest serpent he'd ever encountered, but it did little to scare him. He was too pissed off to care about its size. I hate snakes. Drawing a kunai, Naruto glared at it while concentrating for a moment, channeling his chakra into it while doing his best to imbue it with his wind affinity. Flicking his hand and sending the blade flying, Naruto watched as it pierced straight through the snake's head, killing it instantly, before going through the branch behind it. Snorting softly, Naruto tugged his scarf up over his nose while taking off in the direction he'd come from. While it wasn't perfect, he was satisfied with the potential of his wind chakra. He'll have to focus on it after the exams. Nearing where he could smell his team, though, Naruto suddenly caught wind of a scent he hadn't smelled for a long time. One that made his eyes widen in shock and old fear, one that made his blood boil like lava in his veins, one that triggered a chakra spike as the same intensity as the fight on the bridge in Wave Country. Prey should always be trying to run away. The strange Kusa genin nearly hissed as he stood from the corpse of a large snake he'd been inhabiting. In the presence of a predator, that is. Surging forward and spiraling around the tree limbs between him and Sasuke like a serpent himself, the Kusa genin was suddenly forced to stop halfway as a handful of chakra-imbued kunai punched through the branches in front of him, destroying his original path towards his chosen prey. Everyone looked up to find Naruto crouched down on a branch on all fours, his eyes blood-red and fur ruffled, his tail flicking with pure anger. Sasuke, get Sakura out of here. Naruto snarled from his perch, his gaze locked directly onto the Kusa genin. I have unfinished business with him. Naruto, don't play the hero. He's on an entirely different level than anyone we've ever faced before. Sasuke yelled back, but his words weren't reaching the fox boy like he wanted to. Naruto threw a kunai down near him, the chakra-imbued dagger punching through the wood just a couple feet away from the Uchiha. I said, run! Naruto roared out as he sprung from the branch, his crimson claw blades extending in silver trench knives in hand, each one faintly glowing with his partially wind-imbued chakra as he rocketed towards the Kusa shinobi. Smirking with bloodthirst, the Kusa nin simply stared at Naruto before the fox teen slammed into him, the area around them being destroyed in an explosion of mulched wood and sawdust instantly upon impact. Shit, what the hell has gotten into him? Sasuke snarled as he landed on another branch with Sakura, watching as the multicolored blur that was Naruto chased down the speeding snake-like genin they'd been ambushed by. He's going berserk. A little shocked by the boy's speed, the Kusa genin was actually being forced to backpedal as fast as he could, dodging and weaving the destructive swipes of his chakra-infused claw blades. Darting through the branches in random directions, the Kusa genin lost sight of the boy for only a split second as a large tree branch fell between them, forcing Naruto to simply burst through it in his rampage. The Kusa genin grinned as Naruto sped after him, only for his eyes to widen with surprise as a second appeared directly next to him, having come from a different angle while rapidly spinning through the air. He's fast, the Kusa genin thought to himself just before impact, the second foxboy having become a whirling drill of blades that cut him to shreds, only to be revealed that he'd been a clone. One made with mud that got splattered all around the area by the attack. Snarling as he landed heavily on another branch, his eyes darting up as the Kusa Genin descended upon from above. Bolting to the side with a single mighty shove to dodge them, Naruto kicked off a tree hard enough to cave in part of the trunk before slamming back into them. Once more, they proved to be a mud clone. He wouldn't behave like this without a reason, Sasuke. Sakura explained, the pair watching as their teammate battled it out with their ambusher. I don't know how he got so strong and I don't care. Right now, I hate to say it, but I think we should listen to him and run. No, Sasuke snapped, shrugging off Sakura's hand when she tried to grab his arm to pull him along. Glaring down at the two from where they were, a strange sense of déjà vu coming over him. Was this the reason why Naruto never talked about what happened on the bridge? Was this the same kind of feeling Naruto had back in Wave Country when he thought he'd been killed? Clenching his teeth, Sasuke lost sight of them for a split second, only to look up at a sound just in time to find the gaping maw of a giant snake lunging at them. That is, until a familiar blur slammed into the snake's nose, stopping it completely just as its fang lodged into the thick tree branch the two were standing on. I told you, to run. Naruto snarled through gnashed fangs, an almost crazed, yet lucid look in his scarlet eyes as he glared up at Sasuke. Eyes going wide as he felt a freakishly long tongue wrap around his body, Naruto kicked his legs up, bracing his feet against Sasuke's and Sakura's chest before kicking them off the branch, launching them further away. Get out of here. My, Naruto-kun. I never thought you'd become such a self-sacrificial hero. The Kusa Genin taunted, somehow managing to speak perfectly fine around his own tongue as he suspended Naruto in the air directly in front of him with it. Snarling like something akin to a rabid animal, Naruto struggled to break free from the man's hold on him. Still, I'm surprised to see you've grown so strong, for a failed experiment. Disguised as the Kusa Genin, Orochimaru couldn't help smirking humorlessly. He'd tried putting a cursed seal on the boy when he'd first captured him, but it malfunctioned for some reason. He deduced that it had been because of the Kyuubi's presence, but he never could figure out why exactly. Either way, it had immediately ruined his plans for the boy once it had turned him into a humanoid fox. Thus, he simply left the boy imprisoned under his care, but he still performed a few simple experiments on him to learn as much as he could about the boy's new physiology. By the time Konoha had discovered the lab and raided it, however, Orochimaru had already been long gone. I'll kill you, Naruto hissed through his gnashed teeth, only growing angrier and stronger, something that started to worry the traitorous member of the Sannin. Before he could seal away the Kyuubi's power, however, Orochimaru watched with bewildered eyes as he watched a second tail start to sprout from the base of the boy's spine right beside his original one. Snapping back into focus as it finished, Orochimaru tightened his hold on Naruto while drawing a hand back, his fingertips burning with purple flames. Gogyu Fuin, Orochimaru snarled before slamming his hand into Naruto's stomach where the original seal was located, hidden beneath his dense fur. Screaming in pain, Naruto's eyes went wide, his vision gradually going dark from the pain and from his strength being drained from him. Finally blacking out and hanging limply, Orochimaru eyed the unconscious fox child with mild shock and intrigue. Could they be fusing together? Or was it some kind of side effect from the malfunctioning cursed seal? The second was more likely, the cursed seal he'd used having been an experimental prototype that he had scrapped because of its failure upon first use. Stupid boy. You really thought you could kill me, didn't you? Without another thought, Orochimaru threw him to the side, causing the boy to slam into a massive tree trunk not that far away before falling a good 10 feet to a branch below. Turning his attention back towards Sasuke, Orochimaru grinned. He was going to have fun testing the boy, his second stage Sharingan eyes glaring up at him from his spot further down below.
That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share and do comments.